Bantam Audio Publishing presents Batman Returns. Novelization by Craig Shaw Gardner. Story by Daniel Waters and Sam Hamm. Screenplay by Daniel Waters. Gotham City isn't safe anymore. It's crowded, noisy, dirty, filled with garbage. Not just styrofoam hamburger holders and discarded needles and deadly chemicals that just happen to fall into the river. I'm talking human scum, too. If only Gotham City could be like it was yesterday, back in the 50s, when everybody had bright, smiling faces and believed in the American dream and the value of $1 and kept their problems to themselves. Let's go back to those happier times. Let's go back to the happiest time of all, Christmas time. Our story opens a few months earlier in a big house on a big street, owned by big people who must have big money. And today they have more than that to be happy about, for this man and woman are having a baby. But there's a problem. Father paces back and forth outside a closed door, nervously puffing on a cigarette. From the other room we hear the mother's labor pains. The baby's almost here. The moans stop, then nothing, just silence. Then a new voice cries out, but there's something wrong with it. The door opens and a nurse staggers out, her face blank, as if what she has seen is so horrendous that her emotions cannot comprehend it. The doctor follows her, his face bone white. Father can bear it no longer and rushes into the room that holds his wife and new child. Another silence. And then the father's screams fill the big house. But I promised you Christmas, so skip forward a few months. The house is all done up for the holidays, no expense spared. The decorated tree, huge. The radio is on, brightly playing Christmas music, as father and mother share a little seasonable cheer. Baby is there, too, in that playpen. Maybe more like a cage. Baby mustn't get into mischief. Baby looks out at the bright lights as the radio plays. He knows when you are sleeping. In front of the cage, the nasty family cat slinks by, but not fast enough. He knows when you're awake. One grab and the cat is gone. He knows when you've been bad or good. A single feline scream. Baby chirps with happiness. Later that same night, mother and father take baby for a walk. It's a beautiful winter night, a few snowflakes. You can hear Christmas carolers. Another pair of happy parents wheel their tiny bundle of joy past and call out, "Merry Christmas!" Father and mother manage to smile, moving their carriage by more quickly. A closer look would show it, too, is more like a cage, to keep prying eyes away, and those weird, muffled noises inside. They reach that storybook bridge, the one overlooking the babbling stream. A quick look right and then left, but it's late, and mother and father are alone. Without a word, they pick up the carriage and toss it over the side into the roaring stream. The carriage lands in the rapidly running water and is carried away through the park and down into the bricks and cement and walls of the city, down to where the stream joins the sewers of the great metropolis. The carriage travels on through darkness and the foulest stenches, from one pipe to another and another. At last, the stream disgorges the wheeled cage before a great island of ice. The carriage washes up on the icy shore, and the baby hears a noise and realizes he isn't alone. Out of the darkness stride 4 regal birds, 4 huge emperor penguins, moving in position to stand guard around their newfound treasure. A warming story, don't you think? But it happened long ago, and now baby is all grown up. Christmas time again. But today things are different. And in a store full of toys, a proud father shows a sled to his wife. Oops, have to hide it, 'cause here comes Junior. Farther out, in Gotham City Plaza, an adorable little girl pulls open her precious little purse to find $1 for the Santa Claus, collecting for the Salvation Army. People are shopping and caroling and smiling. Christmas cheer is everywhere. It's all pretty sweet, isn't it? But don't worry. Sweetness can't last forever. Things will get much better very soon. Uh-oh, here's a snow bunny. A well-endowed young lady dressed sort of like an elf, except she's wearing a tiara and banner that reads Ice Princess. She comes up to the microphone and smiles. "Could I have your attention, Gotham City?" And of course, Gotham City, all those shoppers and carolers and smilers, give her their undivided attention. "It's time for tonight's lighting of the tree." Her excited voice chirps over the microphone. How about that? She presses a big multicolored button before her, and the whole big Gotham Plaza Christmas tree lights up. No surprises. At least not yet. Ah, the crowd exclaims as they watch the tree. Oh! Yet a surprise is coming. Soon. But wait a moment. Who's telling us all this? Who is this in the dark? When he looks through that sewer grate, does it remind him of some time long ago when he looked out of the bars of his playpen at the bright Christmas lights? But baby is baby no more. He's grown bigger, much bigger, and he's learned a thing or two. For one, he's learned a jaunty little Christmas tune. I know when you are sleeping, I know when you're awake. He begins to hum it, and then stops. Soon. A butler's work is never done. Alfred dodged through the Christmas shoppers with the ease of a seasoned veteran. On these last days before the holiday, he would fetch the Christmas goose, a few new ornaments for the tree, and perhaps some small presents for friends of his employer.
Paper!
A newsboy shouted.
Read about the latest sightings of the penguin creature.
Alfred stopped to study the lurid headlines on the Daily Gotham. Penguin, man or myth, or something worse.
Paper, mister?
The newsboy waved one in front of Alfred, who simply shook his head and frowned. As the newsboy turned away, Alfred could have sworn he saw something moving down in that sewer grate. It was as if he expected something to be lurking in the shadows. Alfred chuckled. If he didn't watch himself, he'd get as bad as Master Bruce. Who did the mayor think Max Shreck was? Some kind of ordinary citizen? Calm down, Max told himself. Be pleasant to this windbag until he gives you what you want. The mayor was nodding out at the Gotham Plaza Christmas tree. Here's hoping, he whacked the desk. Knock wood, Gotham might just have its first Merry Christmas in a good long while. I almost feel vulgar, Max said with a smile, mentioning the new power plant in this Yuletide context. But if we're going to break ground, I need permits, variances, tax incentives. He paused to shrug apologetically. That kind of pesky nonsense. Power plant, the mayor said as if he had never heard of it, which he hadn't. Max, our studies show that Gotham has enough energy to sustain growth into the next century. Shreck cut him off with a hearty laugh. Your analysts are talking growth at 1% per annum. I'm planning ahead for a revitalized Gotham City. He waved at all the pretty lights. So we can light the whole plaza without worrying about brownouts. Do you like the sound of brownouts, do you? He glanced away from the politician as the door to his office opened, admitting his son Chip and his secretary Selina Kyle. Selina was carrying a tray bearing a silver coffee pot and several fine china cups. Dad, Chip said, with a nod at the large clock on the wall. Mr. Mayor, it's time to go downstairs and bring joy to the masses. Shreck thought. His pitch was running behind schedule. Time to wrap this up. He turned and fixed the mayor with his best Shreck smile. Imagine a Gotham City of the future, he said, blinking on and off, embarrassingly low on juice. Sorry, the mayor replied. You'll have to submit reports, blueprints, and plans through the usual committees, through the usual channels. Max almost lost his smile. Who did this two-bit politician think he was talking to? Selina put down the tray. She began hesitantly. I had a suggestion. Actually, more of just a question. Max's gaze silenced her instantly. He turned to the mayor. I'm afraid we haven't properly housebroken Miss Kyle, he apologized and pushed the mayor toward the door. Fortunately for her, she brews one hell of a cup of coffee. Wish we had the time to enjoy it. And they were gone. Selina looked after her disappearing boss. What had she done? Corn dog. Chip smiled at her, the smile as phony as his part-time job for his father. Thanks anyway, he said with a wave at the coffee tray and strode out after his father. Shut up, Chip, she said when he was gone. She turned and stared at the tray. Actually, more of a question. She wanted to get ahead, show Mr. Shreck that she was really worthy of the title of administrative assistant. But all she ever did was open her mouth enough so that her foot could fit right in. She slapped her forehead. You stupid corn dog. Couldn't she ever do anything right? As soon as Chip caught up, Max took the mayor down the executive elevator, then guided him right through the first floor of Shreck's department store, so important to Gotham City's economy. They went out the main door right by the large Shreck sign, featuring that happy Shreck cat that all of Gotham City loved. The minute they appeared, the news media gathered around. Flashbulbs popped in their faces, questions were shouted in their ears, TV cameras swiveled to follow their every move. All the price of fame. Max nodded pleasantly, the mayor waved, Chip smiled. Max spotted the Salvation Army Santa. What a photo opportunity. He reached for his wallet. The flashbulbs popped merrily as he passed 2 bills to Santa. The one on top was a 50. The Salvation Army guy frowned. The second bill was a single. "Watch your step, Dad." Max looked ahead to the river of melting sludge that his son was pointing at. "It's pretty grotesque." Max made for a dry patch on the far side of the sewer grate, and then he frowned. When his eyes had followed the path of the sludge into the sewer, he almost thought he saw something down below. Not a rat. Much bigger. More like somebody holding an umbrella. An umbrella? Max shrugged off the thought. What did it matter to him what, or who, lived in the sewer these days? Corn dog. Selina looked at the post-it notes tacked onto her computer. Reminders that would help her fit in. "Don't get jokes," said one. Max didn't like it when she got too clever. "Save it for your diary," read another. But none of the half-dozen notes got down to the basics of why she kept screwing up. So what did Max really want? As soon as she asked herself the question, Selina knew the answer. Obey. Selina wrote it on a post-it note and stuck it on top of all the others. She could hear the cheering crowd waiting for Max to give his speech. She frowned, sure she was forgetting something. Her eyes wandered over to the legal pad by the phone. There, in big block letters, was the word speech. Max's speech. The speech she had written and then neglected to give him. Darn! She hit herself on the forehead all over again. Who was the biggest corn dog of all? Max was not the sort of man to wait. He had to have the mayor's okay, and he wanted it now. "I have enough signatures," he said, smiling, "from Shreck employees alone to warrant a recall of a mayor who isn't doing his job." He graciously motioned for the mayor to precede him onto the dais. The mayor smiled back at him. "You don't have an issue, Max, nor do you have a candidate." Max followed his honor up onto the platform. The clock behind the podium read 5 minutes to 7. The mayor grabbed the microphone. It was time to get this show moving. "The man who's given this city so much is here," he announced to the masses. "Welcome Gotham's own Santa Claus, Max Shreck." Max thought the mayor was pushing it a little bit. Gotham's own Santa Claus? He opened his executive portfolio. There was nothing inside. Chip frowned over his shoulder. "Forgot," Max said through clenched teeth. "My speech. Remind me to take it out on Selina." Well, he'd been in worse fixes than this. He turned and faced the crowd with a magnanimous smile. "Santa Claus? 'Fraid not. I'm just a poor little schmo who got a little lucky, and sue me if I want to give a little back." He waved at the pile of brightly wrapped packages, the same worthless trinkets the store gave out every year. "I only wish, in this season of our Savior's birth," he continued effusively, "I could hand out world peace and unconditional love wrapped in a big bow." "Oh, but you can," murmured the squat man beneath the umbrella. "Oh, but you will." He opened the ornate pocket watch that he held. It was 1 minute till. Time to close the umbrella. Alfred managed to skirt the last few happy shoppers as Max Shreck launched into his speech. The man was speaking absolute drivel, and the crowd was actually cheering him on. Alfred was happy to be leaving this madhouse before it became any worse. He stopped to put the packages down so that he might unlock the door of the rolls. When he heard the crowd's roar grow twice as loud as before, he took one final look back at the throng. There, above their heads, he could see some sort of gigantic box, wrapped up like some monstrous Christmas present. The cheers at this monstrosity's arrival were deafening. The big clock in the middle of the mall struck 7. He He wouldn't be getting out of here a moment too soon, Alfred was thinking. Max's mind went blank when he saw the box. Great idea, the mayor remarked. But not mine, Max had to admit, and moved to the edge of the stage to toss presents to the crowd. One of them missed everybody and landed on top of the sewer grate before the podium. Max didn't notice. He had stopped throwing out the presents and stood watching the giant present make its way through the square towards them on the podium. What was this? A small gift had fallen upon the grating, right up above his vantage point. The squat man chuckled. "Deck the halls," he whispered. How generous of them, and how appropriate, for he was about to give all of Gotham City a present of his very own. Shreck's annual Christmas giveaway was all part of the job, Commissioner Gordon thought, but he didn't have to be happy with it. There was always the potential for disaster when there were this many people in this confined a space. And now that publicity-mad store owner had to come up with this giant gift gimmick. Well, Gordon had to look on the bright side. This would all be over in the next few minutes. No one had been killed yet. The huge box rolling into the square was designed like one of those floats in the Christmas parade. Looking at the bottom of the box, Gordon could make out thin wheels at each of the corners propelling the float along. Gordon guessed it was being moved by 4 motorcycles. Between them, the commissioner could see walking feet. He shook his head. It seemed like an awful lot of trouble, even for a media shark like Shreck. He decided he'd better call the other units stationed around the place. Who knew what problems they'd have with crowd control if... The front of the giant package suddenly burst open and 3 men on motorcycles roared out right into the crowd. A 4th cycle ripped out of the side of the box and landed smack in the middle of the plaza. Some of the citizens strolling there didn't make it and were flattened or tossed aside by the marauding cycles. A 5th cyclist emerged from hiding to follow the first 3. And the box still had more surprises. Its top opened and 5 acrobats sprung out, cartwheeling into the panicked and screaming crowd to knock down anyone still left standing. One of them KO'd a mounted patrolman. Another smashed into the special soup kitchen Shreck had set up for the homeless. The volunteers barely escaped. The acrobats wheeled and headed straight for the platform with the Christmas tree. Confusion was everywhere. Calls came in to Gordon from the other cars asking for instructions. The panicked crowd surged away from the plaza and surrounded the commissioner's car, climbing over one another in their rush to escape. Someone was going to get crushed out there. Something had to be done, now. Gordon found his voice again. "What are you waiting for?" he barked into his radio. "The signal!" Bruce Wayne sat in the dark, alone in Wayne Manor, alone with his thoughts. He didn't like going out in crowds much at night. It reminded him too much of another winter night when he was only a boy. His parents had taken him into downtown Gotham City. They had had a wonderful time going shopping, having dinner, going to a show. It was a day filled with nothing but laughter. And then... Bruce closed his eyes, but he could still see the gunman who stepped out of the shadows, could see the double flash of the gun. They had taken his parents away from him. Now he would make them pay. He opened his eyes and saw the light shining in the window. The symbol, a silhouette of a bat in a pool of yellow light. Bruce smiled. He was needed. The squat creature laughed from his vantage point beneath the sewer grate. This was going so well. First the cyclists, then the acrobats, and now the rest of his merry band. It was getting to be a real circus. If all went according to plan, this was the last night he would ever have to watch the world from down here. He saw a beacon split the sky. It only made him laugh that much harder. "Oh, Batman," he said in his odd, raspy voice. "I'm trembling." Selina ran through the lobby and out the main door of the department store. Boy, it sure was noisy. Now where was her boss and all these people? 3 motorcycles burst out of the crowd, headed straight for her. She jumped out of the way as they roared by. Boy, she thought, all those workouts at the gym had actually done her some good. But why weren't the cyclists looking where they were going? They could really hurt somebody. And the way everybody was screaming, was something wrong down here? An organ grinder with a big multicolored organ box was the first one on the stage. He had a monkey on his shoulder. The monkey had a gun. Max hoped it was a cap gun. The organ grinder grinned and turned his box towards the Christmas tree. He twisted the handle and bullets shot out. Ornaments and lights exploded under a hail of bullets. A grossly fat clown, another guy dressed in rags who kept sticking a sword down his throat, and a very colorfully dressed woman joined the organ grinder on the stage. A large portion of the woman's costume consisted of rows and rows of knives. The mayor and Chip edged toward the back of the platform. Max wanted to join them, but where could they run? The lady with the knives said, "Relax, we just came for the guy who runs the show." The mayor stepped forward. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The sword swallower laughed and pushed his honor off the stage.
Not you,
He gurgled around the sword.
Shreck.
"Me?" Max thought as good old Chip stepped in the way.
All this courage.
The clown remarked drolly.
Goosebump City.
The knife lady whipped one of her blades straight at Chip, nicking his ear. "Oh, God," Max thought, as Chip called out, "Dad, save yourself." But Max had already leapt from the platform and was heading for the crowd at a dead run. Alfred was trapped by the surging crowd. Everyone was screaming and pushing futilely one against the other. The crowd seemed trapped by its very density. A thug on a motorcycle plowed through the masses only a few feet in front of Alfred, while 3 stilt walkers started kicking the crowd from behind. Then he heard the roar of engines, not motorcycles, a deeper sound. Alfred looked back to the plaza and smiled at last. The Batmobile had arrived. Blades shot out from either side of the sleek black vehicle, smashing through 2 different sets of stilts in an instant. A pair of stilt walkers fell to the ground face first. Alfred saw an elaborately tattooed circus strongman, all rippling muscles beneath his tight-fitting costume, bearing down. Alfred glanced over to see that the Batmobile was shooting small black bat discs that whirled straight for the gangsters. The Batmobile turned, and Alfred ducked as a disc sailed over his head to connect with the tattooed strongman's cranium. He fell, quite unconscious, as the Batmobile wheeled past. Alfred smiled. That was very nicely done. Max couldn't believe it. He had gotten away. He darted down the side street, free at last of all but a few members of the screaming mob. Max's steps slowed as he felt hot air coming up from a sewer grate below his feet. It felt oddly warm and reassuring compared to the winter chill around him. Maybe he should stop for a moment or two and reconnoiter, perhaps figure out exactly what was going on here. He began to wonder if there was some way he could turn all this to his advantage. Batman turned the wheel. The worst of this band of thugs in the middle of Gotham Plaza had been taken care of. He headed the Batmobile toward 3 criminals who seemed intent on destroying the surrounding stores. They were dressed as clowns. Batman angled the Batmobile so that all 3 were directly in his path, then pressed the accelerator. The clowns turned and fired. The bullets bounced harmlessly off the car's exoskeleton as the Batmobile sped toward them. One clown managed to jump free. The other 2 bounced smartly off the hood. Batman turned the wheel again to follow another fellow, breathing fire on the window displays of the toy store. Wait a moment. Those 2 clowns had managed to cling to the hood. One was firing at the windshield. The clown he had missed was firing at him from behind. Batman hit the brakes and stopped abruptly, launching both clowns into the fire breather. All 3 fell into the smashed window display. 1 clown to go. Batman twisted the knob to activate the hydraulic lift. A steel framework unfolded from the car's undercarriage and jacked the Batmobile up off the ground, spinning it completely around. Batman heard a noise behind him. The fire breather was on his feet, ready to breathe flame on the Batmobile. Batman floored the accelerator. Caught in the exhaust, the fire breather went up in flame. All lit up, Batman thought, like a Christmas tree. Now what was that last clown up to? Selina supposed it was too late to give Max his speech. It seemed to be too late to do much of anything. A guy dressed in a clown suit grabbed her and stuck a muzzle of a gun against her neck. She heard something crack. She managed to look down and saw that the heel had snapped off her brand-new shoe. That's it, Selina thought. Now she was mad. "This is a very serious pair of shoes you ruined," she said pointedly to the clown, who stared at her in astonishment. "Couldn't you have just been a prince and broken my jaw? My body will heal, but that was the last pair left in my size." "Shut up," the terrifying clown hissed. The Batmobile screeched to a halt in front of them. The door flew open, and a man dressed all in black leapt out and headed straight for them. It was Batman. An acrobat somersaulted out of the crowd, heading for him. Batman punched the acrobat's lights out with one very well-placed fist. This got the terrifying clown's attention. He waved his gun at Batman, and then brought its muzzle back to Selina. "Listen up, Mr. Man-Bat," he said. "You take 1 step closer and I'll—" Batman simply smiled. "Sure," was all he said. He whipped out some sort of gun from a holster on his hip and fired a spear toward the clown. The clown jerked his head away as the spear buried itself in the wall behind him and Selina. The clowns started to laugh. "Oh, nice shot!" But Batman wasn't through. There was a line connected to the spear. Batman gave it a sharp tug, and a piece of wall fell forward right on the head of the clown. Selina saw her chance. "You shouldn't have left the other heel," she said, and drove its point into the clown's knee. Clown and gun went tumbling to the ground. Batman leaned over his fallen foe. A gloved hand reached down and brushed at a crimson triangle tattoo over the terrifying clown's left eye. Selina stared. The Batman, hero to millions, inches away from her. Come on, Selina thought. This is the chance of a lifetime. Wow, she began. The Batman? Or is it just Batman? He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. He had very nice eyes. "Gotta go," he said softly, and he was gone, half a block away in a matter of seconds, off to talk with Commissioner Gordon. The crowd gathered around the two and started to cheer. That was it? Her big meeting with Batman? "Well, that was very brief," she murmured, "like most men in my life." She chuckled caustically. "What men?" She looked down at the unconscious clown. "There's you, but let's face it, you need therapy." She knelt and picked up his gun. It wasn't a regular gun at all. It had more of a futuristic look to it, like it shot out electricity or something. She pointed it at the clown and pulled the trigger. The clown stiffened for a second, as if he'd been hit by a jolt of something. "Electroshock therapy," she murmured. "What a bargain. Now we both feel better." Max heard the cheering. Maybe he should go back and join the celebration. The sewer grate he was standing on opened up. Max fell through it and landed on something icy, shiny, and wet. He didn't stop moving. Something had grabbed his ankles and was dragging him into the darkness. Max screamed. "Thanks for saving the day, Batman," Commissioner Gordon said in all sincerity as his men rounded up the wounded thugs. "I'm afraid the Red Triangle Circus Gang is back." Batman surveyed the remains of the carnage around him. "We'll see," was his only reply. Selina threw open the door to her apartment. "Honey, I'm home." She waited for the silence before finishing the joke. "Oh, I forgot, I'm not married." It was an old joke, but it was her joke. She laughed dutifully as she looked around at her studio digs, wall-to-wall carpet, off-white furniture, her doll house, her substantial collection of stuffed animals, the neon "Hello there" sign to greet her, because there was no man to do the job. She hung up her coat, realizing as it bumped heavily against the wall that the pocket still contained the stun gun she had taken from the clown. She pulled it from the pocket and looked at it. An accusatory meow caused her to turn to the half-open window. There was her cat, returned from her night prowl in time to eat. "Miss Kitty," Selina greeted her. "Back from more sexual escapades you refused to share?" She put the gun down and pulled a bowl from the cupboard, then opened the refrigerator door. "Not that I'd ever pry." Miss Kitty walked regally from the window as Selina collapsed back against the counter, totally exhausted. She looked down at Miss Kitty, contentedly lapping milk. Sometimes she wished she could have the carefree life of a cat. "What did you just purr?" She changed her voice, making it more cat-like. "How can anyone be so pathetic?" She nodded in resignation. "Yes, to you I must seem pathetic." She walked over to the phone machine, perched in the midst of pictures of Selina in happier times, on a trampoline as a kid, her 15th birthday with her horse. She pressed the play button and sat down on the couch. The first caller was her mother, her voice sweetly stern as she expressed disappointment over Selina's decision not to come home for Christmas, and then over her lowly job. Next came Paul, wimpy Paul, fumbling an apology as he canceled their planned Christmas getaway. Something about Dr. Shaw thinking he needed to be more of a person these days. Selina only sighed and said to herself, "I guess I should have let him win that last racquetball game." "Selina!" A gruff woman's voice came on next and lectured her for missing her rape prevention class. "It is not enough to master martial arts," the woman growled. "You must stop seeing yourself as a victim." Selina fast-forwarded to the next message and her own voice brightly said, "Hi, Selina. Just reminding you, honey, that you have to come back to the office unless you remember to bring home the Bruce Wayne file." Oh, no, Selina thought. Mac's slave master's meeting with Bruce Wayne was Wednesday, and he wanted all the facts at his stupid fingertips. How could she have forgotten? "You stupid corn dog," she murmured. She went back to the closet to fetch her coat. So much for a good night's sleep. She was slowly going crazy, she decided. Why not make it simple? Do it all at once. For some reason, Miss Kitty meowed goodbye. Max opened his eyes. He was having trouble focusing. He hadn't remembered going to sleep. In fact, didn't remember much at all after he had run away from a bunch of crazy circus performers. He definitely couldn't remember how he'd gotten here, wherever he was. He turned his head. There, inches away, a penguin was staring back at him. Max yelped. The penguin flapped its wings and yelped back. Max turned and yelled all over again. Facing him, smiling at him, were all those circus crazies. The organ grinder, the tattooed strongman, the lady with the throwing knives, the sword swallower, a woman with a boa constrictor looped around her arm and waist, and a ratty-looking lady with a ratty-looking poodle, not to mention all those clowns, acrobats, and stilt walkers. They all stared at Max, snickering. Then they stopped. Max could hear the hum of a huge electrical generator, and then saw it and a huge air conditioner at the other end of what seemed to be a cavern. The air conditioner was covered with grime, and sparks were flying from the generator. To either side of the generator and air conditioner there were penguins. Hundreds of the critters, big penguins and small penguins all over the place, standing on ice. Max heard another sound, a loud dripping sound. Drip, drip, drip. There, among the penguins, was a particularly large one, holding an open umbrella, drops of water hitting the black fabric with sinister regularity. Drip, drip, drip. The penguin with the umbrella waddled forward. Not only was this bird big, but Max could swear it was wearing a tattered and filthy union suit, not to mention a pair of scuffed and well-worn shoes. The bird closed the umbrella. It wasn't a penguin. A small, rotund creature with beady eyes and a beak-like nose stared back at Max. It was the penguin, star of the tabloids, the legendary bird beast from beneath the streets. The penguin grinned. "Hi," he remarked. Max opened his mouth to scream again. No sound came out. "I believe the word you're looking for is..." The penguin paused to take a breath. "Ah! Actually," the penguin said most jovially, "this is all just a bad dream." "My God," Max managed. "It's true, the penguin, man of the sewers, please don't hurt..." "Quiet, Max," the penguin snapped. "What do you think? This is a conversation?" He twirled his umbrella, pressing something down on the handle. The top of the umbrella spit a great spout of fire. The penguin nodded, pleased with the display. "Odd as it may seem, Max, we have something in common. We're both perceived as monsters. But somehow you're a well-respected monster, and I am..." He looked humbly down at himself. "To date, not." He bent down. Max noticed a whole pile of umbrellas at his feet. The penguin picked up a new one. The birdman's hands only sort of looked like hands. They also sort of looked like flippers. Max blanched. But Max Shreck hadn't gotten where he was today by falling apart in front of his adversaries. If he was going to get out of this, he had to talk to the penguin as an equal, even if it was monster to monster. "Frankly," Max said firmly, "I think that reputation is a bum rap. I'm a businessman, tough, yes, shrewd, okay, but that doesn't make me a monster." "Don't embarrass yourself, Max," the penguin interrupted. "I know all about you. What you hide, I discover. What you put in your toilet, I put on my mantle." He picked up another umbrella and opened it, showing a bright spiral design, sort of like those hypno discs Max used to see in comics and magazines when he was a boy. "What's that supposed to do, hypnotize me?" "No," the penguin replied jovially. "Just give you a splitting headache." He pointed the head of the umbrella and pulled some sort of a trigger. There was a small explosion and a spurt of flame from the umbrella's barrel. Max clutched at his chest. "You big baby," the penguin chided. "Just blanks. Would I go to all this trouble tonight just to kill you? No, I have an entirely other purpose." All trace of mirth disappeared from his countenance. He looked serious, solemn. "Max," he continued, "I've been lingering down here too long. I'm starting to like the smell." "Bad sign," He looked into Max's eyes with his own beady orbs. "It's high time for me to ascend, to reemerge. With your help, Max, you know how. You're savvy, you're a cumin. Like you, I want some respect, a recognition of my basic humanity, an occasional breeze." A couple of the circus gang seemed on the verge of tears. "Most of all," the Penguin went on, his own voice almost breaking, "I want to find out who I am, find my parents, learn my human name, simple stuff that the good people of Gotham take for granted." "And exactly why am I going to help you?" Max asked. The Penguin held out his hand. One of his cronies gave him what must have once been a bright red Christmas stocking, before it got covered by greenish gunk. Oddly enough, it was exactly the same size and shape as those stockings that Max's aged grandmother had knitted for their mantle. No, Shreck thought, it was a coincidence. But there was a name stitched on the stocking. He had to squint to make it out. The name was Max. "Let's start with a batch of toxic waste from your clean textile plant," the Penguin was saying as he pulled a rusty thermos from the stocking and unscrewed the cap. "There's a whole lagoon of this crud in the back." He poured out a thick goo. "Yawn," Max replied, thinking, who did this guy think he was trying to blackmail? That could have come from anywhere. "What about the documents that prove you own half the fire traps in Gotham?" Max raised a single bored eyebrow. "If there were such documents, and that is not an admission, I would have seen to it that they were shredded." The Penguin again held out his hand. This time one of the circus goons gave him a stack of something shiny. Max stared. They looked like shredded paper stuck together with a vast quantity of transparent tape. "A lot of tape and a little patience make all the difference," the Penguin remarked proudly. "By the way, how's Fred Atkins, your old partner?" Max felt his cool begin to slip away. "Fred?" he asked nonchalantly. How could this creature know about Fred? "He's, Max managed. He's, been on an extended vacation," and the Penguin reached down and pulled out what looked like a human hand, severed at the wrist. "Hi, Max," the Penguin said from the side of his mouth like some bad ventriloquist. "Remember me? I'm Fred's hand." The Penguin leaned closer. "Want to greet any other body parts? Or a stroll down memory lane with torn-up, kinky Polaroids? Failed urine tests? Remember, Max, you flush it, I flaunt it." As cold as it was down here, Max did his best to smile. "You know," he began in his best business voice, "I think perhaps I could help orchestrate a little welcome-home scenario for you. And once we're both back home, perhaps we can scratch each other's backs." The Penguin put out his hand. "You won't regret this, Mr. Shreck." Max grabbed it and did his best to shake it heartily. The Penguin stepped back. Max still held the hand. He looked down. It wasn't the Penguin's hand. It was Fred. The circus gang laughed as if this was the funniest thing in the world. Max gingerly let go of the hand and let it fall to the icy ground. After a minute, he laughed too, like his life depended on it. Max was back in Gotham Plaza, except this time there wasn't much of a crowd beyond a few curiosity seekers. The smaller stores had all been trashed. Even Shreck's department store had sustained some damage. But in their place were all the TV news cams, with their crews and well-groomed, on-the-spot reporters. The mayor was here as well. He never missed a photo opportunity. Max had suggested that the mayor might bring his wife and infant son along so that he could make a point about family safety. So here they all were, Max solemnly walking beside the mayor and his family, all four of them caught in the glow of TV lights. Max waited to see if all this would work. "I tell you this," the mayor was telling a reporter in his most committed tone of voice, "not just as an official, but as a husband and father. Last night's eruption of lawlessness will never happen." An acrobat somersaulted from behind the ravaged Christmas tree, straight for the mayor's wife, snatching the baby from her arms with a single fluid motion. The circus performer leapt back onto the platform as the mayor lunged for him. The acrobat kicked his honor in the chest, held the baby aloft as if he were accepting an award, and then jumped from the platform and raced through the astonished crowd until he catapulted into an open manhole. Max pushed his way forward as the crowd gathered around the dark hole in the street. Noise erupted from below. "Hey!" someone yelled from the depths. "Ow! Get away! Ouch!" The cries were accompanied by a heavy thumping sound. The crowd gasped as the acrobat, battered and bruised, dragged himself from the manhole and ran away through the throng. He no longer held the baby. "Stand back!" someone yelled. There was something else down in that manhole. "My God, look!" another voice cried. Out of the darkness, the mayor's child was being raised up into the light. The crowd gasped again as a flipper emerged, followed by the face of the Penguin. The crowd cheered. The Penguin smiled. Max had to admit it couldn't have gone better if he had planned it himself, which he had. Alfred paused in his hanging of ornaments on the tree as the man on the screen intoned solemnly,
Gotham will never forget this morning's miracle.
The TV showed the abduction of the mayor's baby and the supposed miracle of his rescue by the Penguin, rising out of the sewer on top of a contraption that looked like nothing so much as a large rubber duck.
That's him, the announcer continued. The shadowy, much-rumored Penguin man of the sewers, arisen.
The mayor's wife was in tears as she grabbed her baby back.
But now, the announcer continued, this bashful man-beast can proudly take his place alongside our own legendary Batman.
The mayor reached out to shake the Penguin's hand when Max Shreck moved in next to the Penguin to stand there beaming, patting him heartily on the back. He bent down to whisper something encouraging in the Penguin's ear. The Penguin, embarrassed, took a little bow. The crowd cheered wildly. The TV picture shifted to an interview with the new hero. The Penguin shielded his eyes with a small frayed umbrella as he spoke in a shy and halting voice.
All I want in return is a chance to find my folks, find out who they are, and thusly who I am, and then just try to understand why they did what I guess they had to do to a child who was born a little different. A child who spent his first Christmas and many cents in a sewer.
His parents, Bruce Wayne was thinking as he heard Alfred ask softly, "Mr. Wayne, is something wrong?" Bruce looked up and shook his head. "No, nothing," he began. "His parents, I hope he finds them." He turned back to the television. So the Penguin had lost his mother and father. Or maybe his mother and father had lost him. Max smiled from where he stood within the entryway of the Gotham City Hall of Records. A short flight of steps beyond, a cordon of police held back dozens of reporters, hungry for a story. "What do you think he'll do to this mom and dad when he finds them?" a reporter near the door asked.
What would you do to your ma and pa?
Another reporter replied sarcastically.
If they flushed you down the poop chute.
There were so many records, so much to do. The Penguin sat at a great table in the cavernous main hall, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of birth certificates. Occasionally he would find what he wanted and jot it down on a legal pad. Day ended, and as night descended, the Penguin worked by the light of a single lamp, flipping through the certificates, jotting down names, boys' names, on his legal pads. Batman guided the Batmobile down the deserted streets of Gotham City. It was far too quiet. It was as if the criminals of Gotham City were staying off the streets, waiting for something really big. A light flashed on the console. Batman pressed a button, and Alfred's face lit up the small video screen by the wheel.
"The city's quiet," Alfred said with a tone of disapproval. "Yet still you patrol. What about eating, sleeping, so you must look after yourself?"
"The Red Triangle Circus Gang," was Batman's terse reply. "They're jackals, Alfred. They hunt in packs at night." He glanced out the windshield. He had almost reached his destination.
"Are you concerned about that strange, heroic penguin person?" Alfred asked.
Batman laughed and pulled up in front of the Gotham City Hall of Records. Funny you should ask, he said, and looked up at the single lit window. Why was the Penguin still inside? Maybe I am a bit concerned. Now, this was quite a turnout. Not only was the press there in force, these days they followed the Penguin everywhere, but there was a huge crowd of the general public as well, including a number of young women dressed in black. Penguin groupies. If he'd known this sort of thing was going to happen, he would have come out of the sewer sooner. Oh, well, all things in their time. The police formed a living chain to keep the curious away as the Penguin strode into the tiny private cemetery tucked in a forgotten corner of Gotham City. The headstones he sought were ahead, twin markers for Tucker and Esther Cobblepot, his very dearly departed father and mother. The Penguin fell to his knees and pulled out a pair of roses that, frankly, were a little the worse for wear. No matter. It was the sentiment that counted. The Penguin stood and walked back toward the crowd of reporters. One obnoxious fellow pushed forward. "So," he began, "Mr. Penguin." The Penguin held up his umbrella. "A penguin is a bird that cannot fly. I am a man. I have a name. It's Oswald Cobblepot." "Mr. Cobblepot," the crude reporter continued, unfazed, and waved toward the grave of the Penguin's parents. "You'll never get a chance to settle with him, huh?" The crowd gasped. My, the Penguin thought, it was certainly good to have the masses on his side. "True," he began. "I was their number one son, and they treated me like number two. But it's human nature to fear the unusual. Perhaps when I held my Tiffany baby rattle with a shiny flipper, they freaked." He paused and turned to the crowd. "But I forgive them." The crowd cheered. He had them in the palm of his hand. Or should that be flipper? All of Gotham City was talking about the Penguin. "Penguin forgives parents," the paperboy called. "Read all about it." Gotham City responded, everybody stopping whatever they were doing to read the charming news. "You don't need hands as long as you've got heart," quoted one from the paper before him. "My heart is filled with love," a second read aloud. A couple passed nearby, talking animatedly. "Abandoned penguins from the old Arctic World exhibit raised him. Makes you remember the true meaning of the holiday," the woman chimed in. "The love, the giving." Max Shreck chuckled. His plan had worked, and then some. He just hoped that the Penguin would be sufficiently grateful when the time came. After all, Max might be rich, but he could always get richer. Bruce Wayne studied the front page of the newspaper projected on the video screen before him. The page was old and yellowed. He pressed a button on the console. The computerized microfiche reader jumped to the next page. "Red Triangle Circus put on a swell show last night." Nothing of value here. He hit a combination of keys, and the command appeared at the top of the screen. Search for Red Triangle. Back issues blurred by. Then another paper came into focus. "Triangle Circus has returned for a 2-week..." Still too early in the circus's career, before they had turned to a life of crime. Bruce hit the search key again as Alfred entered, carrying supper on a tray. "Thanks, Alfred," Bruce murmured as the butler placed the tray on the table by his side. "Master Bruce," Alfred began gently, "does the phrase Christmas holiday hold any resonance for you?" Bruce simply laughed and turned his attention back to the screen as another old newspaper slid to a stop on it. "Triangle Circus is back," he read aloud, "with a freak show that may not be suitable for your kids, featuring a bearded lady, the world's fattest man, and an aquatic bird boy." He turned to Alfred in triumph. Alfred did not appear impressed. "Why are you determined to prove that this Penguin, Mr. Cobblepot, is not what he seems? Must you be the only lonely man-beast in town?" Bruce's answer was to read a choice part of the next article aloud. "Circus folded its tents yesterday, perhaps forever. After numerous reports of missing children in several towns, police have closed down the Red Triangle's fairgrounds. However, at least one freak show performer vanished before he could be questioned." Bruce turned with a triumphant grin. There. Alfred had to see the connection now. "I suppose you feel better now, sir?" the butler only remarked dryly. Did he? Bruce thought about it. "No," he admitted. "Actually, I feel worse." Selina's pen sped across the page in front of her. She already had 12 other pages of notes that she'd made from the computer files. One more file left to browse through. She felt a hand on her shoulder, and her pen stopped. So did her heart. She looked up to see Max grinning down at her. This late at night?
Working late? He asked solicitously. I'm touched.
I'm boning up for your Bruce Wayne meeting in the morning, Selina said. But Max didn't look convinced. He never realized how hard she worked. I pulled all the files on the proposed power plant, she went on hurriedly, and Mr. Wayne's hoped-for investment. I even opened the protected files and... She stopped, because for the first time Max Shreck looked impressed.
How industrious, he commented. And how did you manage to do that?
Well, Selina replied, I figured that your password was Finster. Your Chihuahua? She glanced back at her notes. It's all very interesting, she continued with brisk efficiency. Though a bit on the technical side. I mean, how the power plant is a power plant in name only since... She glanced up at Max, but he only gave her a nod of encouragement. Since instead of generating power, it'll sort of be... She searched her notes. Yes, it'll be sucking power from Gotham City and storing it, stockpiling it sort of, which is a very novel approach, I'd say.
And who would you say this to?
Max asked smoothly. Without waiting for an answer, he calmly lit a match and set fire to her notes. Selina swallowed and hastily got to her feet. Well, she replied. Nobody? Max dropped the burning notes into the trash.
What did curiosity do to the cat?
He asked and took a step towards her. I'm no cat, Selina replied quickly, although at the moment she wished she could be as small and swift as one. She took a step back. I'm just an assistant, a secretary.
And a very, very good one,
Max agreed. Too good? Selina guessed, and Max simply nodded. She took another step away. It's our secret, she said. Her back hit the window. There was suddenly nowhere else for her to go, but Max kept on coming. Selina was about to get frightened half out of her skull. Who did this Shreck guy think he was? Okay, she said, trying to sound firm. Go ahead, intimidate me, bully me if it makes you feel big. I mean, it's not like you can just kill me. Max shook his head sadly.
Actually, it's a lot like that,
he said, as he grabbed her and savagely pushed her through the window. She was falling, down through the darkness and the swirling snow. It was so beautiful. If you had to die... She heard canvas rip as she fell through an awning. She hit a second awning, then a third. They slowed her fall, but she was surrounded by cold and white. She had no breath left in her. Help me, she managed. Somebody. Someone warm and loving. Someone above all this. Miss Kitty, she called weakly. Her world went from white to black. What had he done? The power plant was important to him in his future plans, but perhaps he felt too strongly about it to do something like this. Max shivered as he looked out the remains of the window. A noise made him turn. Chip stood in the doorway.
It was terrible,
Max stumbled.
I leaned and accidentally knocked her out.
Chip nodded sympathetically.
She jumped,
he corrected his father.
She'd been depressed.
Max stared for an instant before he realized what was going on.
Yes,
he agreed heartily.
Boyfriend trouble?
He suggested. Chip shook his head.
PMS,
he stated decisively, turned and walked out of the room. Now there, thought Max with admiration, was a son. Certain things go beyond rational explanation. The connection felt between two spirits, lovers who can sense each other's thoughts when they are apart. A parent who knows something has happened to a child half a world away. But these connections are not limited to humans alone. Sometimes, at moments of extreme stress or peril, they can be shared between human and animal. Selina Kyle lay half-conscious in the snow, battered and bruised and about to freeze to death. Something kept her from falling into that final sleep. Noises, animal noises, the sound of cats. Miss Kitty? But it was far more than one cat. From all the meows and purrs that surrounded her, she must be in the middle of an army of cats, as if the whole feline population of Gotham City had come to her rescue. She had always liked cats, Now, if they'd only calm down so that she could get some sleep, but they wouldn't leave her alone. Miss Kitty climbed upon her chest and breathed into her mouth. A Siamese purred meaningfully into her ear. Other cats rubbed against her legs and feet. And old Tom bit her finger. Her eyes flew open, and she understood. She was Selina Kyle no more. She was reborn. Her bruises no longer mattered, nor her loss of blood, nor even the cold of the winter night. When she finally entered her apartment with Miss Kitty in hand, the place no longer suited her. There would have to be a few changes. She set to work immediately with black spray paint. When she finished with that, she grabbed her stuffed animals and fed the smaller ones to the garbage disposal. The larger ones had to be done with knives. And then, using some interesting black scraps of fabrics, she sewed herself a very special outfit. As for claws, she had to have claws. It was amazing how things found around the kitchen could be turned into deadly weapons. Miss Kitty was full of purrs and imperious meows, approving every change. There was one final task. She tore at the cheerful neon sign until it no longer read, "Hello there." It now announced, "Hell here." For it would be hell for all those who had wronged her. She sat down on the floor in her new special clothes and watched the sunrise. Miss Kitty purred at her feet. "I don't know about you, Miss Kitty," she said softly, "but I feel so much yummier." And with that, she stretched out to reach the rising sun, stretched out just like a cat. Bruce Wayne moved quickly through Gotham Plaza. It was still a mess. He wondered if Max Shreck still wanted to talk about that power plant his assistant had mentioned. Perhaps this devastation would have changed Shreck's mind. Somehow, though, Max never seemed to pay much attention to what went on in the street, even when it was as bad as this. Bruce stepped into the lobby that led to the business offices of the Shreck Empire. Up in the penthouse suite, he walked into the inner office and saw Max Shreck and his son Chip, both staring out of a smashed picture window at the ground. "I hope nothing, icky happened to her," Max was saying, and turned. "Bruce!" he called heartily. Bruce stepped forward to shake hands, studied the window more closely. "Primitive ventilation," he murmured. "Damn those carny Bolsheviks the other night," Max said, "throwing bricks at my window." "No," Bruce disagreed and pointed. "No glass on the inside." Max frowned. "Weird, huh?" he said. "Why don't we go into the conference room?" He led the way. "I'd offer you coffee, but my assistant is on vacation." Bruce took a seat and Max sat down next to him, facing him so closely that their knees almost touched. "Bruce," he began with a smile, "I'm pushing this power plant now because it'll cost more later. Time is money, life is short." Bruce snapped open his briefcase and took something out. "I commissioned this report," he announced. "You should see it." He handed it to Max, who flipped through it as if he really wasn't interested. "Here's the point, Max," Bruce went on candidly. "Gotham City has a power surplus. You know that. So what's your real angle?" Max jumped to his feet. "A power surplus?" he exclaimed. "Bruce, shame on you. One can never have too much power." Chip, nearby, rapidly nodded his agreement. "If my life has any meaning," Max insisted, "that's the meaning." "Max," Bruce replied firmly, "I'm going to fight you on this. The mayor and I have already spoken, and—" "Mayors come and go," Max interrupted sharply. He put up his dukes and threw a punch at the air. "Really think a flyweight like we got now could last 15 rounds with Muhammad Shreck?" "Guess we'll find out, Max," Bruce agreed. "Of course, I don't have a crime boss like Cobblepot in my corner." "Crime boss?" Max laughed. "Shows what you know. Oswald is Gotham's new golden boy." "Oswald controls the Red Triangle Circus gang," Bruce shot back. "Wayne," Max insisted, "I'll not stand for mudslinging in this office. If my assistant were here, she'd already have escorted you out to—" "Wherever he wants," a female voice cut in. Bruce turned to see a woman enter the room. And what a woman. She was very fashionably dressed, very attractive, and also somehow familiar. She smiled at Bruce. Nice suit. Of course, Bruce thought. She was that woman the clown had seized as a hostage. She had seemed so uncertain then, compared to the way she looked at him now. Bruce smiled back.
Selina?
Max Shreck looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Selina. That's my name, Maximilians, she replied with a sly smile. Don't wear it out, babe. Max blinked and shook his head. Selina, this is, Bruce Wayne. We've met, Bruce replied smoothly. Selina looked confused. We have? Bruce's smile faltered. She hadn't met him at all. She had met Batman. Sorry, he said quickly. I mistook me for somebody else. You mean mistook me, Selina corrected. Didn't I say that? Bruce asked. Yes and no, she replied with a truly fabulous smile, but her hand was bandaged. Bruce stepped forward and gently took it into his. What happened? He asked. Yes, Max hurriedly interrupted. Did you injure yourself on that ski slope? Is that why you cut short your vacation and came back? He forced a smile. Selina shrugged with a slight frown. Maybe that broken window in the other room had something to do with it. It's blurry. She paused for a moment. I mean, it's not complete amnesia, just last night. A complete and total blur. Max continued to smile, but he also looked a little frightened. Selina, he said, please show Mr. Wayne out. Selina smiled at Bruce again and turned to lead him out. Bruce decided he could follow her anywhere. Once they were out in the hall, she turned to him. You don't seem the type who does business with Max Shreck, she said bluntly. And you don't seem the type to take orders from him, Bruce replied. There was that smile again. Well, that's a long story, she murmured. I could free up some time, Bruce volunteered. I'm listed, Selina said, gazing into his eyes. I'm tempted, Bruce said, gazing back into hers. I'm working, Selina said, taking a step back toward the conference room. I'm leaving, Bruce said, and took a step towards the elevators. She disappeared, and he turned. Selina, he murmured. The car arrived. He stepped inside. He'd have to give her a call. Except he leaped forward, forcing the doors apart before they could close completely. Selina took off her bandage and slowly, methodically squeezed blood from her finger into the percolating coffee. She looked up and found Bruce Wayne watching her. She tried to smile. Pouring myself into my work, she explained. Bruce smiled back. I didn't catch your last name. Oh, she replied. Kyle. Bruce gave her a thumbs up and disappeared. There's something about that man, she thought. She purred deep in her throat. This Selina thing had Max spooked, but he couldn't let this little setback destroy his confidence. It was time to call the Penguin and check up on Oswald's new home. Not, of course, that Oswald Cobblepot knew anything about its real purpose. Yet. The phone rang in the Penguin's warehouse. Oswald Cobblepot had to admit it. Max had come through on this one. His new headquarters had 2 floors. Downstairs was big and brightly lit and still under construction. Upstairs here, it was dirty, dingy, cluttered, a real working space. The Red Triangle Circus Gang hung out up here, practicing their acts and generally acting rowdy. The Penguin had his list of names, all on that pile of yellow legal pads. Now all he had to do was cross-reference them against the white pages of the Gotham City phone book. It was not a simple job. The phone kept on ringing. The organ grinder finally answered it. Yeah? He held the phone out. For you, boss. The Penguin grabbed the phone. What is it? He growled. I'm busy up here. Good. Max's all too cheerful voice greeted him. Stay busy up there. I got plans for us below. What did he mean? Swell, later. He slammed down the phone. He'd deal with Max at the proper time. For now, he returned to finding the addresses for every single name. After all play and no work made a dull penguin. It was time to prowl, so she roamed. What did we have here? The dirty streets of Gotham City seemed to have coughed up some more of their scum. Your average garden variety mugger who had grabbed a pretty young woman and dragged her back into an alley. Help, Batman! The woman began to cry out. Batman? Is that all the woman could think of? Now, the mugger smirked. Pretty young thing. His victim cowered and held out her purse. Please, don't hurt me. I'll do anything. The other woman had had quite enough of this. She walked out of the alley and backed the mugger against the wall. He stared at her in astonishment. Who the... he began. Be gentle, she replied. It's my first time. The mugger leaped up with a growl, intent on grabbing her. She gave him a savage kick, staggering him back. Hey, not bad, she thought. Now it was time for the talons. She jumped forward and set to work, scratching up his face. The mugger screamed and fell to the asphalt. His victim rushed to her side. Thank you, she gushed. I was so scared. Her defender pushed the woman back against the wall. You make it so easy, don't you? She asked in disgust. Always waiting for some Batman to save you. The victim cringed as her savior leaned forward to whisper into her ear. I am Catwoman. Hear me roar. And with that, Catwoman leaped away, cartwheeling out of the alley to disappear into the night. With all these interruptions, the Penguin would never finish. He looked up from his desk to see Max Shreck stepping between the members of the Red Triangle circus gang, nodding to all of them as he addressed the Penguin. Ah, your extended family. The Penguin sighed. Max was leading up to something. His lists would have to wait for the minute. Come downstairs, Oswald, Max urged. I have a surprise. The Penguin scowled. I don't like surprises. But Max was insistent, waving the Penguin away from his desk toward a spiral stairs. Don't want to spoil it, Max explained as he tried to put his hands over the Penguin's eyes. When the Penguin growled, Max hastily yanked his hands away. Then close them, he insisted. The Penguin dutifully closed his eyes as Max led him down the stairs. This had better be good, or he'd let the circus gang practice on Max even earlier than he had planned. Ta-da! Max announced, and the Penguin opened his eyes and looked around. The storefront had been transformed into something bustling and cheerful, full of brand-new desks and state-of-the-art computers and smiling college kids. The walls had been covered with red, white, and blue bunting. But the most astonishing things were the signs and posters, the biggest of which read, Cobblepot for Mayor. There were posters taped all around, every one with the Penguin's picture on it. Everyone cheered and applauded. The Penguin was flabbergasted. But, he began, What was going on here? Yes, Max said effusively. Adulation is a cross to bear. But someone's got to supplant our standing in the way of progress mayor. And don't deny it, Mr. Cobblepot, your charisma is bigger than both of us. Mayor, the Penguin replied. This didn't make any sense. Max, he pointed out. Elections happen in November. Is this not late December? Max waved a well-dressed pair forward. A man and a woman, both smiling perfectly gleaming white smiles. They made the Penguin nervous. The man stared critically at the Penguin and suddenly announced, Keep the umbrella. Works for you. I'm Josh. Here. He shoved something in the Penguin's mouth. Reclaim your birthright. The Penguin glared down at the object between his lips. It was a long black cigarette holder. The woman was circling him now. I'm Jen, she announced as she grabbed his sleeve. Stand still for a second while I slip on these little glove thingies. Glove thingies? Our research tells us that voters like fingers. She was explaining as she slipped on a pair of black gloves. The Josh person, in the meantime, was fingering the Penguin's coat. What was this guy's problem? Not a lot of reflective surfaces down in that sewer, huh? He observed. Reflective surfaces? Oh, he meant mirrors. Jen laughed. The Penguin liked the way she laughed. He laughed, too. All the people around them started to laugh as well. It could be worse, the Penguin remarked. My nose could be gushing blood. Josh was puzzled. What do you mean, your nose? The Penguin bit him quickly, viciously, right on the nose. Enough, Max called, pulling the two combatants apart. Everyone back to work, he yelled as Josh fainted. Max led the Penguin to a quiet corner. You're right, he admitted. We missed the regularly scheduled election, but elected officials can be recalled, impeached, given the boot. With you there, Oswald Cobblepot, ready to fill the void. Oswald Cobblepot was still watching Jen. I'd like to fill her void, he murmured.
We need signatures, Max insisted, to overturn the ballot. I can supply those, Oswald, but we need one more thing. A platform? The Penguin suggested. Stop global warming. Start global cooling. Make the world a giant icebox. That's fine, Oswald, Max agreed. But to get a mayor recalled, we need a catalyst, a trigger, an incident. Yeah, the Penguin was thinking. Mayor. Now that he'd gotten used to the idea, he really liked it. Like the Reichstag fire, Max continued urgently. The Gulf of Tonkin. What was Max saying? Ah, he suggested. You want my old friends upstairs to drive the mayor into a foaming frenzy. Max grinned. Precisely. Sounds like fun, the Penguin agreed. But he hesitated. I mustn't get sidetracked. Sidetracked? Max exclaimed. Oswald, this is your chance to fulfill a destiny that your parents carelessly discarded. Hey, Max had a point there. Reclaim my birthright, you mean? The Penguin asked. Now that he thought of it, it sounded pretty good. Max nodded. Imagine, as mayor, you'll have the ear of the media, access to captains of industry, unlimited poontang. The Penguin was impressed. You drive a hard bargain, Max, he said. All right, I'll be the mayor. He turned away and walked over to the windows of the storefront. Thrusting the heavy blinds aside, he looked out at Gotham City at night. A city that would soon be his. He could have it all. And then, with the whole city at his feet, he'd complete his sweet revenge. The Penguin smiled and whispered 3 words. Burn, baby, burn. Nothing's as good as the circus. The organ grinder played a merry tune and then pressed a plunger. Boom went the insta-teller machine. The fat clown related every evil deed to the Penguin as it occurred. The ice rink's been torched, he said. The 12th precinct reports offensive graffiti and a pharmacy heist. I'd love to get my flippers dirty, the Penguin cried in triumph. Bust someone's skull, eat someone's pet. He cut himself off. But action must be balanced by discretion. He returned to the phone books and his legal pads. Gotham City was falling apart. Violence filled the night. A woman with a belt filled with knives used an axe to beat down a door. Around her, gang members beat up any defenseless citizen who happened to be passing by. Batman stepped from the shadows. The thugs turned to greet him. From his belt, he pulled out a small electronic device and punched 4 white dots on it, then a red. The woman with the knives threw a blade into Batman's chest. It lodged in his body armor. Batman punched in a second code on the device. The thugs howled as one as they rushed him. Batman pressed a final button. 2 wings sprouted from the sides of the box. His computerized batarang was ready for them. It whizzed from his hands, ricocheting off the skull of one thug to the next. 1, 2, 3, 4 in front of him. Then the woman with the knives, knocking each one of them cold. Batman took a step forward as the batarang swooped back behind him and knocked out the 5th thug, sneaking up from the rear. The batarang headed back to Batman when suddenly a poodle jumped from a nearby doorway and caught the batarang in its mouth. It leaped back to join a woman in a ragged circus costume, and both took off down the alley. Batman took a step after the fleeing pair when a man leaped into his path and proceeded to pull a sword from his throat. Batman gave him a quick elbow to the ribs. The man doubled over. Batman helpfully removed the sword for him. He stepped over the sword swallower and found himself facing the thin clown with 3 sticks of dynamite strapped to his chest, along with a small clock face. "I'll blow up this hole," the clown began. Batman used the sword to cut the straps, then flipped the bomb into his free hand with the sword's point. He rapped the clown on the skull with a hilt. The clown sank to the ground. Batman headed off down the alley, tossing the sword aside. The bomb he'd keep for a minute. You never knew when one would come in handy. Catwoman ignored the gunfire, the sirens, even the screams. She was looking for a little destruction of her own. She walked up to the front door of Shreck's with its oddball Shreck logo of the kitten etched into the door's glass. How appropriate for Catwoman. She punched it out with her claws, then reached in and opened the door. The entire department store was hers. She clawed through a series of silk blouses and designer originals, ripping them to shreds from a whole row of mannequins. It wasn't enough. She looked around to see what she could smash next. That glass jewelry case looked promising. She leaped on top of it, stomping her spiked heels down with all her weight.
She stopped at the sports department. They had trampolines. She used to love trampolines. The destruction of the department store could wait. She wanted to take a bounce or two. Whoops, she had company. Catwoman watched 2 security guards approach as she bounced up and down. "Who is she?" one of them asked, and then added, "What is she?" The second one nodded, open-mouthed. "I don't know whether to open fire or fall in love." "You poor guys," Catwoman answered sadly, "always confusing your pistols with your privates." As if waiting for their cue, both guards drew their guns. Catwoman leaped from the trampoline, kicked the revolver from one hand, then whirled and slapped the gun away from the other guard. She cartwheeled over to the wall and punched open a wall tile. What have we here? A propane tank. She flicked out her claws and cut the line. Gas hissed out noisily. The guards ran as Catwoman skipped over to the automotive department. All these aerosol cans would do nicely. Next stop, today's kitchen, and all those lovely microwaves. A few aerosol cans in a few microwaves, and those cheerful beeps as the microwaves were turned on, and hey, Shreck's department store was going to have a party. Someone hit Batman so hard in the back he felt it through his body armor. He staggered, then spun around and saw the tattooed strongman. "Before I kill you, I let you hit me," the strongman said and flexed his tattoos. "Hit me, I need a good laugh." Batman pushed both fists into the strongman's stomach. The strongman roared with laughter. "You call that a—" His laugh choked in his throat. Batman hadn't used his hands to punch so much as to attach a bomb to the strongman's leopard skin. Before he could react, Batman gave him a firm push down a nearby open manhole. The falling scream was cut short by an explosion. Smoke rose from the manhole as Batman turned. There, on the other side of the street, was the Penguin. The Penguin paused to shake debris from his umbrella. When he looked up, he saw Batman. "Admiring your handiwork?" Batman asked. The Penguin shook his head vigorously. How wrong could a masked vigilante be?
"During the scene," he explained soberly, "assessing the devastation, upstanding mayor stuff."
Batman shook his head. "You're not the mayor." The Penguin shrugged.
"Things change."
But why were they treating one another as adversaries? The Penguin stuck out one of his improved image gloves.
"Hey, good to meet you. We'll be working hand in glove in Gotham's near and glorious future."
Batman didn't shake. "Once you were their freak," he said. "Now these clowns work for you. Must feel pretty good." So much for being a glad-hander, thought the Penguin.
"Better than you know, Batboy," he replied.
"What are you really after?" Batman asked. The Penguin smiled.
"Ah, the direct approach. I admire that in a man with a mask."
He poked his umbrella at Batman.
"But you don't really think you'll win?"
The man with the mask smiled. "Things change." How droll, the Penguin thought, and was about to say something when they both heard glass smash at the entryway to Shreck's department store. He and Batman turned to see a woman in black do a series of backflips across the plaza toward them. She performed a final somersault and came to her feet, facing them both. Her costume was not only black, it was tight and shapely, and it made her look like a cat. This was one cat the Penguin would like to get to know better. "Meow," she remarked, and Shreck's department store exploded. The Penguin looked out from under his umbrella. The flying glass seemed to have stopped. Much to his disappointment, that Catwoman seemed to have disappeared as well. He glanced over at his adversary.
"I saw her first,"
the Penguin remarked. Batman did not appear amused. Perhaps it was time for the Penguin to make his exit.
"Gotta fly,"
he said, and pushed a button on his umbrella. The steel rods supporting the fabric began to whirl, shredding the black cloth, spinning free, a compact rotor that carried the Penguin up into the air. He sailed away from danger and towards his destiny. Batman used the winch and tackle of his utility belt to hoist himself the last couple of floors. She had to be up here someplace. He vaulted onto the roof of the building he had seen her climb only a minute ago. "Where's the fire?" The voice came from behind him. "Shreck's," Batman replied, turning to see Catwoman let herself down from a small rooftop shack. Her black costume had been torn in half a dozen places, exposing patches of pale flesh and several scratches. "You," he began, and she kicked him in the face. Batman staggered back but recovered quickly, slamming her in the chin with a well-aimed blow. She fell back into a whimpering ball. "How could you?" she moaned. "I'm a woman." "I'm sorry," Batman began hesitantly. Catwoman caught him in the chest with one of her boots, sending him backwards. He was headed over the ledge. He reached out his hand and heard the crack of a whip. A coil looped around one of his outstretched wrists. His hand was jerked, and he felt himself being pulled back toward the rooftop. Catwoman lashed the other end of her whip to a weather vane, keeping Batman dangling over the edge and a killing drop. "As I was saying," she observed calmly, "I'm a woman and can't be taken for granted. Are you listening?" Batman grimaced. Was she kidding? Hanging on every word. "A man dressed as a bat is a he-man," she explained. "But a woman dressed as a cat is a she-devil." She ran her claws lightly along the whip that held him. "I'm just living down to my expectations. Life's a bitch. And now so am I." Batman carefully used his free hand to reach into his utility belt and pull out a certain red and blue capsule. "A he-man?" he replied ruefully. "Sure. They shine that beacon in the sky, then wonder what hole I crawl out of." "Wow," Catwoman said. "A real response, and you're not even trying to get into my tights." She plucked the whip with one of her claws, nicking it ever so slightly. "But if you're so down on them out there, why bust your bat buns to protect them?" "Exploding department stores keep me up," Batman said, and quietly snapped the capsule, letting the red half flow into the blue as he murmured, "One." "I can't sleep either lately," Catwoman admitted. "A little link between us. But bottom line, baby, you live to preserve the peace, and I'm dying to disturb it." She reached her claws forward to cut again at the whip. 4, 5, Batman concluded. The tube in his hand had turned a bright purple and was bubbling. He lobbed it at her arm as she cut away at the whip. The mixture exploded against her forearm, and she screamed. She lost her balance and fell past him, her claws catching onto a narrow ledge a few feet below. Batman freed his wrist from the whip and leaped down to her side. He grabbed her wrists and pulled her up. The ledge was so narrow that he had to hold her very close. "Who are you?" she said, gazing into his eyes. "Who's the man behind the bat?" She smiled sadly. "Maybe he can help me find the woman behind the cat." Her clawed hand stroked his body armor. "That's not him. Ah, here you are." She found a place just above his waist where the two main pieces joined. Without warning, she drove her talons through the fabric into his flesh. Batman cried out in pain, pushing her away, and she fell. "No!" Batman whispered, and saw her hit the back of a passing truck filled with sand. Catwoman waved up at the astonished Batman. "Saved by the kitty litter," she remarked dryly. "Some date." She ripped her sleeve away to expose a nasty red welt on her forearm. So that was Batman, she thought. "Bastard," she added. "Bitch," Batman muttered as he examined the wounds on his lower stomach. He walked over to his communication console in the Batcave and flicked a switch. "Alfred," he called, "would you bring me some antiseptic ointment, please?" "Coming," the butler's voice replied. "Are you in pain, sir?" "Yes," Batman admitted, "a bit, but I don't really mind," he added softly. He gingerly rubbed his sore stomach. "Meow," he murmured. The Penguin's chance was here at last. After that shameful night of crime, what could the Penguin, that is Oswald Cobblepot, do but declare his candidacy for mayor? So here he was at his headquarters, surrounded by the media and his 100 volunteers. What could the Penguin do, except say a few inspiring words? "I may have saved the mayor's baby," he said, "but I refuse to save a mayor who stood by helpless as a baby while Gotham was ravaged by a disease that turns Eagle Scouts into crazed clowns and happy homemakers into catwomen." His volunteers cheered. In the background, he could hear reporters calling in their stories. "Oswald Cobblepot, the mystery man-beast who's been romancing Gotham, today made a bid to run Gotham." Ah, it was music to his ears. What could be better? A very shapely young volunteer stood in his path. "Mr. Cobblepot," she squealed as she looked adoringly down at him. "You're the coolest role model a young person could have." "And you're the hottest young person a role model could have," he said, leaned forward and dropped his voice. "Here, wear a button." It was, of course, his duty to pin that button personally on her pert young breast. But a politician had to be careful in these troubled times. He decided it might be best to go upstairs and cool off.
I could really get into this mayor stuff,
he murmured to himself as he climbed up to his other headquarters. Everything looked to be in order. The organ grinder was supervising the construction of those special weapons so necessary for their next assault. "Mr. Penguin," the thin clown began, sticking his face up close. "There's a—" The Penguin stomped hard on the clown's foot.
"My name's not Penguin," he barked. "It's Oswald Cobblepot."
"Oswald," the knife lady interjected. "There's someone here to see you." She jerked her head towards the far corner of the loft. There, curled up on the Penguin's bed with a pretty little kitty in her lap, was the woman of the Penguin's dreams, Catwoman. The canary in its cage beside the bed was crying out in alarm, not at all pleased. The Penguin stepped forward.
"Just the pussy I've been looking for," he said.
Catwoman moved her hands slowly up and down her upper arms. "Chilly in here." She must be talking about those air conditioners, originally set up to recreate the temperature of the old Arctic World exhibit.
"I'll warm ya,"
the Penguin heartily volunteered. "Down, Oswald," Catwoman warned. "We need to talk. We have something in common."
"Sounds familiar,"
the Penguin agreed.
"Appetite for destruction?"
he guessed.
"Contempt for the czars of fashion? Wait, don't tell me. Naked sexual charisma."
"Batman," Catwoman replied simply.
"Oh, him," the Penguin said dismissively. "What is it with you two? He's already history."
He raised his umbrella and pointed to the blueprints on the wall.
"Check it out!"
Catwoman walked over to the detailed diagrams of the Batmobile. It had taken Max a pretty penny to get them. Every single part of the Batmobile was labeled, every nut and bolt that held that infernal machine together. The Penguin chuckled.
"We're gonna disassemble his spiffy old Batmobile," he explained heartily, "then reassemble it as an H-bomb on wheels."
He made the sound of a muffled explosion.
"Yesterday's victor is tomorrow's vapor."
Catwoman shook her head. He'd have more power as a martyr. No, to destroy Batman, we must first turn him into what he hates most, namely us. The Penguin frowned.
"You mean frame him?"
But Catwoman was no longer listening. She had noticed the huge pile of yellow legal pads on his bedside table, and now picked one up to peruse the names he had written down. She mused. Not even in office yet, and already an enemies list. The Penguin scurried over, thrusting his gloves forward to protect his list.
"These names are not for prying eyes."
He frowned up at this intruder.
"Why should I trust some cat broad?"
Catwoman reached into the birdcage and snatched his pet canary and popped it into her mouth. The Penguin grabbed one of his many umbrellas stacked close by and pressed a button on the handle. A knife popped out of the top, a blade he used to pin Catwoman's little kitty against the bed.
"Swallow the canary, and your cat's history," he said.
Catwoman spit out the canary, damp but alive. It flew up into the rafters. The Penguin pulled the blade away from the kitty cat's throat. Catwoman protectively scooped it up, then freed one of her hands and leaned forward to stroke the Penguin's cheek gently with her claws. "Look," she said, nodding at her arm. "Batman napalmed my arm. He knocked me off a building just as I was starting to feel good about myself. I want to play an integral part in his degradation." She certainly sounded sincere and angry. That was important. The Penguin was big on angry.
"Well,"
he observed slowly,
"a plan is forming. A vicious one, involving the loss of innocent life."
"I want in," Catwoman insisted. She shivered. "The thought of busting Batman makes me feel all dirty. Maybe I'll give myself a bath right here." She slowly ran her tongue along her upper arm. The Penguin licked his lips.
"You've got yourself a deal, puss,"
he replied huskily. And with any luck, the Penguin had himself some action. The Penguin was on TV. These days, it seemed like he was always on TV.
"I challenged the mayor,"
he declared with a melodramatic swoop of his umbrella,
"to relight the Christmas tree in Gotham Plaza tomorrow night."
Bruce Wayne looked up as Alfred placed his dinner before him. On the TV, the Penguin droned on.
"He must prove that under his administration we can carry on our proud traditions without fear. but I pray Batman will be there to preserve the peace.
Sir, Alfred remarked, shall we change the channel to a program with some dignity and class? The Love Connection, perhaps? Alfred was right. But this crook had just offered a challenge to Batman, and Batman couldn't help but accept. Subtle, Bruce remarked, reached for the remote and turned the Penguin off. A rehearsal, he thought, for the real thing, when Batman turned the Penguin off forever. They had managed to reopen some of the stores on Gotham Plaza, making quick repairs to the devastation of a couple days ago. Nothing was stronger than the lure of Christmas cash. Bruce saw a boy walking between his mother and father. The boy seemed so happy. And why shouldn't he be? He had his parents. Christmas. Bruce could not think of a more depressing time of year. He turned and saw a woman looking at a store window. A woman that he recognized. A woman he would very much like to get to know better. Maybe he could cheer up after all. Why are you doing this? She was saying to her reflection. She didn't appear to be happy herself. He tapped her on the shoulder and she jumped. Selina, he said softly as she turned. Hi, didn't mean to. She placed a delicate hand on her heaving chest. She seemed relieved to see him. Scare me? She replied. No, actually, I was just scaring myself. It's a treat to find you out in the world, Bruce said. Away from Ebenezer Shreck. Treat to be here, she valiantly replied, and took a step away from the window. What's the story? Bruce asked as he fell into step beside her. Holiday blues? Selina pointed at the Gotham Plaza newsstand full of newspapers with blazing banner headlines. Batman blows it. It's a catastrophe. Me, ouch. The news these days, she explained, people looking to superheroes for their peace of mind, blaming their problems on supervillains. And it's not even accurate, Bruce complained. I mean, Batman blows it? The guy probably prevented millions in property damage. Further progress appeared to be blocked by the preparations for the upcoming ceremony. A pair of workmen hoisted a new banner above the plaza. The relighting of the tree, tonight at 7. Selina looked up at it, more unhappy than before. You're not coming to that, are you? I wouldn't be caught dead, Bruce said. The mayor stupidly took Cobblepot's bait. And it's going to be a hot time on the cold town tonight, Selina added with a little laugh that made Bruce look at her. I detest violence, she went on, and then paused. Christmas complacency can be a downer, too. It was Bruce's turn to chuckle. You've got a dark side, Selina. She looked at him with those piercing blue eyes. No darker than yours, Bruce. Well, I'm braver at night, he admitted. She gave him a smile. Me too. They started to walk alongside the yellow police line. Maybe we'll watch it on TV, he suggested softly. We? Selina turned to look at him. You and me, he finished for her. No, he corrected himself. That would make it me and me. He paused. Is that what I said? Selina laughed. Yes and no. They turned to the curb. There was his Rolls pulling up to the curb. Bruce took Selina's hand. She didn't object. Together they walked to the waiting car. The Penguin waddled into the tent that held the controls for tonight's celebration, along with the dressing room for that well-built ice princess. Who are you? She demanded when he marched in. Talon Scout, the Penguin reassured her. Her frigid demeanor changed into a charming smile. Come in, she insisted. You know, I don't just light trees. I studied the method. It was by mail, but... She stopped when she saw that the Penguin was accompanied by a poodle with an odd-looking box in its mouth. The Penguin had to yank it free. The poodle growled. What's that? She asked prettily. A camera or something? The Penguin nodded most agreeably. Say cheese, he said, and jauntily punched a series of buttons. The wings sprouted out of the Batarang's sides. She never knew what hit her. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping. Selina Kyle, and tonight she did feel like Selina should always have felt, sat next to Mr. Bruce Wayne on the world's most comfortable couch. Mr. Bruce Wayne, handsome, clever, and interested in her besides. Why couldn't she have met him long ago? Say before Catwoman entered the picture. Alfred the butler, an actual butler, reappeared silently to refill their eggnogs. Wow. She smiled at him. He smiled back and disappeared just as silently as he had appeared. She turned to Bruce. Doesn't the gold-plated bachelor bit get a little stale? He smiled. Imagine a man who smiled at her humor. and replied, "Somewhat like the lonely secretary syndrome, I suppose." Possibly, she admitted, but she had other more important questions to ask. Girlfriend? Bruce looked into her eyes. As in serious? Had one. Didn't work. What went wrong? Selina asked. Hang on, I think I know. You kept things from her. But Bruce shook his head. Nope, I told her everything. Now this, Selina thought, was far more interesting. And the truth frightened her? She asked. Bruce put his eggnog down and moved closer, all his attention only on her. Well, he began hesitantly, how can I put this? There were two truths, and she had trouble reconciling them. Because I had trouble reconciling them. He sighed. So Vicky said. Vicky? Selina couldn't help herself and giggled. Ice skater or stewardess? Photojournalist, Bruce replied. Well, was Vicky right about your difficulty with duality? Bruce hesitated again. If I said yes, then you might think me a Norman Bates or a Ted Bundy type. He paused and hesitantly leaned forward. And then you might not let me kiss you. She didn't wait for him to finish leaning. The kiss lasted for a while. They finally had to come up for air. She looked at him very seriously. It's the so-called normal guys who always let you down, she said. Sickos never scared me. At least they're committed. Bruce put his arms around her. Ah, he whispered, then you've come to the right lonely mansion. They kissed again. Her fingers began playing with the buttons on his shirt, then unbuttoning them, one after another, working their way down. His hand covered hers on the third button. Was she going too fast? His hand moved over and started to play with her buttons. Uh-oh, did the male want to run the show? But if he took off her blouse, how would she explain the burn on her arm? Reluctantly, she pushed his exploring hand away. Bruce seemed every bit as embarrassed as she did. He sputtered, I never fool around on the first date. His hand brushed against his stomach as if checking something. Nor I on the second, she agreed. She didn't know how long she could hold out around somebody like him. How long would it take for that sort of burn to heal? Bruce looked at her. What are you doing 3 dates from now? Weren't we going to watch the relighting of the tree? She said. Bruce turned the TV set on with a remote control. Instead of the ceremonies, the screen was filled with the scenes of an all-too-familiar chaos in Gotham Square. We repeat, the announcer was saying in the midst of a surging and screaming crowd. The Ice Princess has been kidnapped. Commissioner Gordon... The scene shifted to the police commissioner, clearly pale and visibly shaken as he was asked, Can you confirm the reports we're hearing of Batman's suspected involvement in the abduction? In the library, Bruce sat up as Gordon replied. The evidence is purely circumstantial. We found this, stained with blood, in the missing girl's dressing room. He held up some kind of box with wings. Selina looked at Bruce. The Penguin had set his plans in motion, and Catwoman had promised to be there. Instead, she had almost let a man take control. Bruce looked upset as well. He rose with an apologetic smile. Selina, he said quickly, I'm just going to check those chestnuts Alfred was roasting. There was no need to be apologetic. If anyone should be apologizing, it should be she, because she had to get out of here. Catwoman had an appointment. In the foyer, Bruce encountered the butler. Alfred, he said quickly, I have to get to the plaza. You heard the Penguin. He was practically begging me to show. Which is why I'd hoped you'd snub him, Alfred replied calmly. But Bruce was already heading toward the entrance to the cave. I'm afraid I can't. There's been a kidnapping. Tell Selina, that is Miss Kyle, that some business came up. He stopped and turned. No, tell her some major deal fell through. She'll feel sorry. He stopped himself again and looked to the heavens for inspiration. Here's what you do. Just tell her... Alfred already knew precisely what to say. I will relay the message, he assured his employer. Thanks, Bruce said and ran down the hallway. Alfred turned and almost ran into Miss Selina Kyle as she rushed into the foyer. Alfred, she said brightly. Miss Kyle, he began evenly. Mr. Wayne has asked me to let you know that... Mr. Wayne, she said, yes. Would you tell him that I've been going through a lot of changes and... She stopped herself with a shake of her head. No, don't say that. Just... This is not a rejection, my leaving like this. It's... She stopped again and simply laughed helplessly. Alfred nodded reassuringly. He liked this young woman. In fact, it appeared that she and Master Bruce were virtually made for each other. It was too bad. They'd come so close. But Bruce didn't want to have to explain those scars on his stomach. Not yet. He donned the suit quickly And Batman jumped into the Batmobile and headed for downtown Gotham City. He guided the Batmobile into a deserted alley immediately behind Gotham Plaza. He was sure the capture of the Ice Princess wasn't the Penguin's only plan, but part of some larger picture. He jumped from the car, pausing only to activate the Batmobile's security shields. Fools, let them try to establish order. The only orders around here would come from the Penguin. The mayor, soon to be the ex-mayor, was speaking agitatedly into his microphone, trying to restore control. People, fellow citizens, there's no need to panic. Whatever he wanted to say next was lost under a shriek of feedback as the Penguin twisted the knobs on the controls of the speaker system. And while he was busy helping his honor, his helpers were busy making adjustments of their own. The poodle lady led the way, her mangy mutt at her side, all her circus chums following, each carrying a toolbox. The name of the party was the Batmobile. One of the Red Triangle circus gang members climbed atop the security shield. Using a crude handheld laser, he disabled the whole system. Whoosh! And the shield was gone. The rest of the gang rushed up, each member equipped with a very detailed drawing that outlined their own very specific task. Batman watched the events unfolding in Gotham Plaza from the shadows. The mayor was valiantly attempting to calm the crowd. Half his speech was lost in feedback. Batman looked up and saw a light on in a window across from him. And through the window, bound and gagged, was the Ice Princess. He shot out a grappling line to the ledge above. Not far away, the Penguin's minions had totally dismantled the Batmobile. Now they added a clamp here, twisted a wire there, and the pièce de résistance? Why, that special antenna installed on the car's underside, so that the Batmobile could be totally controlled by an outside signal. A signal managed by someone who was very good at twisting knobs. Batman crashed through the window into the room that held the Ice Princess. He quickly crossed the room and pulled the gag from her mouth. "We've got to hurry," he said. "I was set up to look like I did this." "No sweat," the Ice Princess replied brightly. "I'll just tell the police I was kidnapped by an ugly birdman with fish breath." Another woman's voice cut in. "Did someone say fish?" Catwoman dropped down from somewhere overhead. "Yummy! I haven't been fed all day." She leaped forward, kicking out at Batman. He stepped aside, grabbing her heel, allowing her momentum to flip her all the way over. "Eat floor," he replied. "It's high fiber." Catwoman sprang up easily. "Hey, stud," she pouted. "I thought we had something together." "We do," Batman replied as he sprang forward, knocking his head against hers. Of course, his was reinforced with body armor. Catwoman reeled, but only for an instant. She backflipped away from him, straight for the Ice Princess. Batman found her more impressive with every encounter. A single swipe of her talons cut the rope that held the other woman. "Gotta go," Catwoman called. "Girl talk." She threw the chair at Batman and pulled the squealing princess through a doorway. Batman swatted the chair aside and crossed the room in 3 quick strides. The door was locked, dead-bolted. He kicked it open. The hallway was empty. From an open window on the far side of the hall, he heard the Ice Princess scream. Catwoman had taken her up the fire escape. Batman took the metal stairs 2 and 3 at a time. It was quiet above. No more sounds of struggle. Batman leaped onto the roof, ready to dodge or fight. At the far edge of the roof, the Ice Princess shivered in her skimpy costume. Catwoman was nowhere in sight. "She let me go," the Ice Princess explained. "Too easy," Batman reasoned, and took a few tentative steps toward her. "Move toward me slowly," he said levelly, "away from the edge." The Ice Princess tried to smile and took a step forward. "Look out!" The Penguin stepped out from behind an old chimney and threw an umbrella straight at the Ice Princess. "Lawn dart!" The umbrella's sharp point embedded itself inches away from the Ice Princess's toes. She took a step back. "Don't panic," Batman called. The umbrella dropped open, releasing a cloud of tiny, flying bats. The Ice Princess screamed, trying to get away from the flock of flying rodents. Batman ran towards her, but she was too close to the edge. The Klieg light shone up from below, highlighting her as she lost her balance. Batman leaped out to grab her, but she was gone. Commissioner Gordon despaired at restoring order to the streets. He had 100 uniformed policemen stationed around the Gotham Plaza. 20 more watched the scene from the upper stories of surrounding buildings. Somebody shouted and pointed towards the roofs above. There, silhouetted in a sweeping light, was Batman, racing across the rooftop with arms outstretched. A second light picked up the form of the missing Ice Princess. The lights crisscrossed just as he reached her, obscuring them both. Batman reached out for her, and she fell. "Batman?" Someone in the crowd yelled. Batman pushed the princess. The commissioner frowned. It was much more likely that Batman was trying to save her, but there was no way he could tell that to an angry crowd. The Penguin's plan was perfect. The Ice Princess fell toward the platform screaming. She hit with a sickening crunch. New sounds began coming from the Christmas tree. The Ice Princess had been able to do her job after all. The button that controlled the lighting of the tree was on the platform. Her body must have hit it. Too bad it was the last job she would ever do. But when her body hit the button, did it simply light the tree? Oh no. Instead of lights, the Penguin had filled the tree with cages full of bats, all released at the press of that one button. The crowd screamed and panicked as the bats swooped among them.
"Rats with wings," the Penguin observed brightly. "Do your things!"
He looked across the roof. Batman was still here, heading for him, in a way that suggested he intended doing great bodily harm. The Penguin heard a commotion on the stairs, and stepped back so he would be behind the fire door when the cops arrived. There were half a dozen of them in riot gear, with Gordon in the lead. They burst through the door and quickly fanned out, guns at the ready. All those guns were pointed at Batman, at the edge of the roof, outlined by the Klieg lights. "Wait!" Batman called. "Hold your fire!" Gordon began. His words were lost under gunfire, as a hail of bullets pushed Batman off the edge of the roof. His body armor saved him. That and the fact that he had only fallen a short distance, to a penthouse terrace, maybe a dozen feet below. He tried to stand and found himself pushed back by a high-heeled boot. Catwoman stood over him, smiling. "You're catnip to a girl like me," she purred. "Handsome, dazed, and to die for." She leaned down and licked him cat-style across the lips. Batman looked up and realized she was holding a sprig of mistletoe. "A kiss under the mistletoe," he managed, still fighting for breath. "Mistletoe can be deadly if you eat it." Her face was inches away from his. She smiled. "But a kiss can be even deadlier if you mean it. You're the second man who killed me this week," she said sadly. "But hey, no prob, I've got 7 lives left." "Killed her?" "I tried to grab you, save you," Batman protested. Catwoman looked meaningfully toward the edge of the roof. "Seems like every woman you try to save winds up dead. Or deeply resentful." She sunk her claws into his armor and yanked him to his feet. "Maybe," she suggested, "it's time to retire." She made a swipe at his mask with her claws. Batman jumped back, away from her, and off the roof. But this time he was ready. He raised his arms. Twin wings sprouted from either side of his armor, turning him into a glider. He swooped down, surrounded by the rising bats from the Christmas tree below. He banked over the crowd, heading for the alley and the Batmobile. But he was coming in very fast. The wings were too awkward to maneuver. The left one shattered against a brick wall. He collapsed forward, skidding on the pavement. Batman hit hard with a groan. The ground spun around before him. Safety was only a few feet away. He had to get to the Batmobile. Catwoman and the Penguin sat on the edge of the terrace, watching Batman's wings collapse in the alley. The Penguin had brought champagne. When he handed her a glass, she looked at him. How could he be so happy? "You said you were going to scare the Ice Princess," Catwoman said with a frown.
"And I kept my word," the Penguin replied jovially. "The lady looked terrified."
He reached into the depths of one of his many pockets and pulled out what must have once been a box from Tiffany's. It was now rather the worse for wear. The Penguin opened it, revealing a ghastly gold ring overladen with jewels. It was hideous.
"So what are we waiting for?" he urged. "Let's consummate our fiendish union."
"Oh, please," she said with a shudder. "I wouldn't touch you to scratch you." The Penguin began to quake with rage.
"I ought to have you spayed," he shouted. "You sent out all the signals."
"Did I?" Catwoman asked, and silently had to answer, "Maybe I did." But why blame herself all over again? Put the blame where it belonged, on men. She turned back to the Penguin with new resolve. "Me? Domesticated?" she asked angrily. "By you? I doubt it, you repulsive, awful—" She hesitated, looking for some sufficiently insulting way to end the remark. "Penguin?" The Penguin hugged his umbrella to his bosom.
"The name is Oswald Cobblepot,"
he said in a mortally offended voice, and suddenly flung the umbrella at her. She dodged, but the handle snaked around her neck, forming a noose as the ribs of the umbrella spun above her, creating a rotor that lifted her from the roof. Catwoman couldn't breathe. The Penguin waved sadly.
"Goodbye, my unintended,"
he called after her as the umbrella copter lifted her from the ground.
"Go to heaven."
He was going to hang her with his umbrella. The umbrella whirled her away from the rooftop and out over Gotham City. There had to be some way to loosen this noose. She reached up with her claws for the rope that stretched across the back of her neck. When she sliced through it, she was suddenly no longer being held aloft. The umbrella went spinning ever higher. Catwoman fell. She saw lights immediately below, a glass enclosure on a roof. She crashed through it. When she opened her eyes, she saw she had landed in dirt, surrounded by flowers. She had survived. But was she happy? Catwoman wailed loud enough to break the rest of the glass. Another life down the tubes. There were banners and posters all over the place, all saying in a dozen different ways to vote Cobblepot for mayor. The Penguin loved every one of the slogans. His supporters clustered around him, cheering. So why couldn't he shake this gloom? Maybe it had something to do with killing not one babe, but two. He pulled a handful of campaign buttons out of one of his many pockets and started to pin them on the chests of his supporters, his female supporters. Right away, he started to feel better. What was a dead babe or two when there were all these other babes to go around? Still, he had other fish to fry at the moment. He jumped aboard his bus and hurried back to his specially designed miniature Batmobile, complete with switches, meters, dials, knobs, levers, buttons, and a mini steering wheel. Somehow Batman made it to the Batmobile. "Shields," he said, and the voice-activated security system switched off, dropping the vehicle's protective coat. And not a moment too soon, he heard angry shouts behind him. They wanted him. They thought he had murdered the Ice Princess. In their minds, he was already tried, convicted, and ready for execution. They'd found him, this mob of self-appointed vigilantes. Vigilantes. It had a familiar ring to it. What made them so different from Batman? Only that he had the state-of-the-art equipment, and maybe, just maybe, he had his anger under a little more control. He jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut above him. The mob couldn't reach him now. He exhaled a moment's peace before he took the Batmobile home. The door suddenly locked. The control panel flashed on. The engine roared to life. Batman could only stare at the controls. He hadn't touched anything. The small TV monitor blipped on, but instead of Alfred's face, Batman saw the gloating features of the Penguin.
"Don't adjust your set,"
the maniacal creature said pleasantly.
"Welcome to the Oswald Cobblepot School of Driving. Gentlemen, start your screaming."
The Batmobile slammed forward as if Batman had floored the accelerator. The car careened forward and turned, tires squealing onto the street. The Penguin had two screens in front of him. One showed Batman's face, very tense, definitely type A personality. The second screen showed a driver's eye view of where the Batmobile was going. Very important, since the Penguin was doing the steering, and no doubt he would steer the Batmobile straight into an accident. But it had to be a spectacular one, and the Batmobile should run over as many innocent bystanders as possible before it happened.
"Maybe this would be a bad time to mention it," the Penguin said, "but my license has expired."
He turned the Batmobile toward the crowd-filled Gotham Plaza and once again pressed his personal accelerator.
"Of course,"
he added with a cackle.
"So have you."
Batman was in the middle of a nightmare. He had only left the Batmobile alone for a few minutes, and now the car was under another's control. It was being driven at top speed directly toward the Christmas crowds. The time and expertise to accomplish this sort of thing was staggering. How had they managed it? Batman ripped out a handful of the new wiring, then a second. The car sped forward. The lever controlling the bat discs hummed as it started downward. The Penguin was activating the weapons system. Batman grabbed it and pushed it back up with all his strength. The lever slammed down again. This time, no matter how much he tried, Batman couldn't budge it.
"Hey, just relax," the Penguin said to Batman, "and I'll take care of the squealing, wretched, pinhead puppets of Gotham."
He looked out of his driving monitor. Screaming Gothamites were fleeing every which way in front of the marauding Batmobile. But wait. Look at the defenseless grandmother they had left behind.
"Helpless old lady at 12 o'clock,
the Penguin announced for Batman's benefit and pressed down on the accelerator. Something around here still had to control the car. Batman just had to think it through, but fast. He pulled up in the ceiling panel, revealing a mass of fuses, the real control center of the Batmobile. But which one? He tried to visualize all the charts he'd drawn when he'd helped to design this thing. Third one from the left should do it. Or so he hoped. Batman reached up and pulled. The Batmobile squealed to a halt. The old lady, only a few feet in front of the suddenly still vehicle, ran away at last. One saved, Batman thought. One more to go.
You gotta admit, the Penguin cackled happily on the monitor, I played this stinking city like a harp from hell.
Not for long, Batman thought. He drove his fist through the monitor, silencing the Penguin in a shower of sparks. He kicked down with his heel once, then twice. The floor panel bent enough for him to pull it free, revealing a new mass of wires and spinning gears. There, mounted to the Batmobile's undercarriage, was some sort of antenna. Batman reached down and snapped it in two. Now, he thought, time to get out of here. He hit the accelerator and shot between two police cars and out of Gotham Plaza. The Penguin couldn't believe it.
Came this close to a perfect evening, he cried in anguish. Iced the princess, blew away Batman, almost got married, killed the bitch.
But Batman had gotten away. It was enough to sour his whole day. Luckily, he had other plans to fall back on. The mayor's race, for one, and after that, his masterstroke, so magnificently nasty that he could forget any small failings here. Gotham City would remember Oswald Cobblepot forever. Batman wasn't in the clear yet. 3 police cars had converged and were giving chase. He rummaged through the exposed wires on the dashboard. He had to override whatever damage the Penguin had done to his vehicle and get the Batmobile's functions operating at a level that would help him with his escape. He made a sharp right. The cruisers managed to follow. The street narrowed in front of him into a space so narrow that you could barely call it an alley. Much too narrow for the Batmobile, or the police cruisers. Batman flipped a switch. Nothing happened. The switch was dead. He pushed aside the torn instrument panel and quickly pulled 2 loose wires out of the mass. He sparked their ends together. Now! The windshield wipers began to beat back and forth. Funny, Batman murmured, and frowned down at the mess behind the dashboard. Where could the wires be that he needed? The alley was coming up fast. Oh, there they were. Batman connected the wires. The sides of the Batmobile fell away as the wheels realigned themselves beneath him, making his vehicle a streamlined bullet of a car, something he called the Batmissile, narrow enough to fit through the space immediately ahead. The first police cruiser tried to follow, but only succeeded in wedging itself between the walls. From the noise that followed, Batman surmised that the other 2 cruisers had piled into the back of the first. He was in the clear. He leaned into his turn and disappeared into darkness. Max Shreck stood by the Penguin's side, trying to be cheerful enough for both of them as he guided the Penguin toward the platform where he was scheduled to give his speech.
So he survived,
Max was saying dismissively. Come on, be a mensch, stand tall. His voice trailed off as he saw the look the Penguin gave him. All the Penguin could think of was Batman, a living, breathing, totally intact Batman.
He didn't even lose a limb, an eyeball.
He sighed at the inequity.
Bladder control.
Max wouldn't listen. He waved at the cheering crowd in the plaza and pointed to the latest banner, Recall the Mayor.
Listen to them, he said with an all-encompassing wave. They've lost faith in the old symbols. They're ready to bond with you, the icon of the future.
He smiled encouragingly.
We'll celebrate tonight at my annual masquerade ball.
The Penguin could hear the chant rising from the throng. Oswald, Oswald, Oswald. Yeah, Oswald Cobblepot, hero to the teeming millions of Gotham City. Not the mayor, not Batman. They were all screaming for him. More important, a lot of them were women. They were babes. Cheap, maybe. Tawdry, most certainly. But they were his babes. Screaming Cobblepot groupies. It gave him reason to go on. The Penguin moved to the microphone, and the cheering redoubled. It gave him strength. When he spoke, his voice was no longer a simple squawk. Now it was a booming squawk.
When it came our time to ensure the safety of our city,
he began,
did the mayor have a plan? No. He relied on a man, a Batman.
The crowd screamed its adulation. Selina Kyle stood and watched Max Shreck and Oswald Cobblepot, a.k.a. the Penguin, the 2 men who had tried to kill her. She wanted them to go as high as this campaign would allow. The heights, after all, would make their fall so much more satisfying. Catwoman wasn't playing anymore. It was time for her to sharpen her claws. Bruce Wayne found himself watching television again, another of those never-ending media events with the Penguin. He was talking about Batman.
A ticking time bomb of a costumed freak,
the overblown politician exclaimed to the crowd,
who finally exploded last night, spraying this city with a shrapnel of shame.
Bruce walked over to his aquarium and reached into the replica of Wayne Manor in the middle of the exotic fish. He fished out a key from an upper bedroom window. Alfred frowned at the TV. I'm concerned about repairing the Batmobile. It's not as though we can simply bring it to Joe's body shop, is it, sir? Bruce glanced up at the butler. He had more interesting things to wonder about. Selina, Bruce mused as he shook the water off his wrist. He walked over to an Iron Maiden against the wall. Funny, but sort of mysterious. He let the rest of the sentence hang as he placed the key in the Maiden's lock and turned. It sprang open to reveal its deadly spikes. Bruce stepped inside. He was on his way to the Batcave. I believe I'll take the stairs, Alfred commented dryly. Bruce jumped from the chute that had brought him from the mansion above. He pulled out the recordable CD that he had taken from the Batmobile and inserted it into his specially modified player as Alfred came puffing down the stairs behind him. The Penguin was displayed in all his glory on the large monitor that dominated this corner of the cave.
You ask, he droned on. Am I up here for personal glory?
Keep on talking, Bruce thought, until I can get the equipment set up properly and Alfred can determine the frequency. Alfred sat down at his own console and punched up the find frequency command. Within seconds, the computer responded that they had the signal. Now all they needed was to make a few minor adjustments, and all those modifications Batman had made to the Gotham Plaza public address system should soon become apparent.
No,
the Penguin continued, oblivious to the fun that was to come.
The glory I yearn to recapture is the glory of Gotham.
Alfred punched in another command. Jam frequency. The Penguin was on a roll.
The glory of Gotham,
he shouted, and everyone cheered.
How can this be accomplished, he called. I know you're all concerned.
There was no response. His microphone had gone dead. It was only a momentary glitch. Max's people would have it fixed in a jiffy. The Penguin decided to repeat the last sentence.
I know,
he began, and his voice boomed back at him.
Hey, just relax, and I'll take care of the squealing, wretched pinhead puppets of Gotham.
The Penguin stared at the microphone.
Wait a sec,
he sputtered.
I didn't say that.
At least not since last night, when he was talking to Batman. Last night? Batman? Nobody could hear his real voice anymore, as his recorded voice boomed on.
You gotta admit, I played this stinking city like a harp from hell.
The crowd was booing now, throwing things. The Penguin turned and glared at Max. How could he allow something like this to happen? Perhaps it was time to rethink his campaign. Bruce Wayne allowed himself a smile. The crowd was reacting just as he'd hoped, and the Penguin was getting angry right back at them. What could Bruce do now but raise the stakes? He scratched the CD like a professional DJ to single out that special phrase.
This stinking city.
And again.
Stinking city. Stinking city.
So, Penguin, how do you like that rap?
Stinkin' city, stinkin' city.
The Penguin fell back from the microphone, spinning around, almost losing his balance.
Stinkin' city.
Something hit him. Lettuce, tomatoes.
Stinkin' city.
It was music to Bruce's ears. The Penguin grabbed his umbrella. Now, if he could get the rotor working. But wait. He'd brought the wrong umbrella for escape. This number had another function entirely. People threw more things at the stage. The Penguin lifted his bumbershoot and sprayed bullets into the crowd. Turn on me, will you, Gotham City? Somehow this just seemed to make the audience more upset. The Penguin decided it was time to head for cooler climes. He jumped from the stage, heading out of Gotham Plaza and toward the park. A number of good citizens gave chase. The Penguin turned and gave them another taste of lead. When the cops showed up and began returning his fire, he knew he had to get out of here. That bridge ahead looked awfully familiar, like it was out of a storybook someplace. A quaint stone bridge nestled in the woods above a rushing stream. Except this particular story was much more personal. He had visions of a baby carriage and another fall a long time ago. The Penguin jumped, losing himself in the icy waters of the river below and the sewer beyond that he called home. So much for politics. Now it was time to get down to his real business. The Penguin trudged out of the sewer pipe. He was wet, bedraggled, and humiliated, but he was home. He banged into something and looked up. It was his duck boat. He could use this in his plans, those same plans he'd let Max Shreck and his own foolishness lead him away from. What did he care about babes? He jumped into the boat and revved it over the sewage lagoon to his Arctic island. There, ahead, were the penguins, his penguins, squawking and playing.
My babies, he murmured. Did you miss me?
The Penguin seemed to squawk in reply. He drove his duck up to the dock as he saw his first few members of the Red Triangle circus gang enter his lair through the main tunnel. The clown waved and bounded over.
Great speech, Oswald. The way you told those rubes the score.
The Penguin smacked him on the head with his umbrella.
My name's not Oswald, he barked. It's Penguin. I'm not a human being, I'm an animal. Cold-blooded. Crank the AC.
He pulled off his tuxedo coat and those damn gloves.
Where's my list? He demanded.
The knife lady appeared, carrying a great stack of yellow legal pads, with all the information he'd gathered, courtesy of the Hall of Records and the Gotham City phone book.
It's time,
the Penguin chortled with glee.
Gotham will never forget.
He tore off the top page and handed it to the first of his minions, then the second page to another.
These are the firstborn sons of Gotham City,
he cried to the assembled gang.
Like I was. And just like me, a terrible fate waits for them. Tonight, while their parents party at the masquerade ball, they'll be dreaming away in their safe cribs, their soft beds, and we'll snatch 'em and carry 'em into the sewer.
He danced merrily over to the water's edge.
And toss 'em into a deep, dark, watery grave.
Some of the gang members began to mutter. Penguin, the acrobat said hesitantly. I mean, kids, sleeping, isn't that a little... The Penguin lofted his sleek black umbrella and shot the acrobat dead.
No,
he finished dryly.
It's a lot.
The rest of the Red Triangle circus gang managed a hasty cheer. There were certain duties a butler never approved of. Still, a duty was a duty. Alfred took the invitation down to the Batcave to remind his employer. He found Master Bruce hard at work on the undercarriage of the Batmobile. Alfred cleared his throat. Bruce looked up. Mr. Wayne, a reminder. Tonight is that loathsome party hosted by that failed kingmaker Max Shreck. May we RSVP in the resounding negative? His employer paused for a moment. I'm tempted, but... He frowned. Well, it is an occasion to celebrate, and... His frown changed to the slightest of smiles. Selina will probably be there. Ah, Alfred replied. Who, may I ask, are you going as? Bruce only smiled enigmatically. You'll never guess. These last few days had not been among the best for Max Shreck. First, there was that little altercation with Selina, and then there was the Penguin. Max had thought he had seen opportunity knocking with the little Birdman, but unfortunately his chosen candidate appeared to have even more screws loose than the average politician. The Penguin had been disgraced and was the subject of a massive police manhunt. He and his threats were out of Max's life for good. So now it was time for the big party, time for holiday cheer, time to forget the old and embrace the new, time to finally get his special power plant under construction. Max wanted to show he was still here and still kicking. What better way to do that than hold his annual masquerade ball in the recently bombed department store, patched up and lit like a nightclub for the occasion? He had dressed himself in a special turban headdress for tonight's party, just like a Swami who knows all. The guests started to arrive in droves, with all varied costumes. It was telling that there wasn't a single penguin. How fickle the public was in Gotham City. Max climbed up on the platform. It was time for the party to begin. Attention shoppers, he called into the microphone. A number of guests laughed appreciatively. Like this splendid department store, Max continued, Gotham can quickly bounce back from the tumult, the Sturm und Drang of the past days. So deck the halls and shake your booties. The band behind him launched into a tune with a heavy beat. Max spotted the mayor wearing a Julius Caesar toga, complete with rubber knife handles and lots of fake blood. The very fact that his honor had attended meant he realized how much he needed Max Shreck's money, power, and influence. Max turned to stare at another newcomer who stood out in the crowd. It was Bruce Wayne, dressed as himself. He climbed down off the platform and went over to greet the millionaire playboy. Ingenious costume, Max remarked as he shook Wayne's hand. Let me guess, trust fund goody-goody? Wayne wasn't in the mood for banter. You almost made a monster the mayor of Gotham City. Max took a deep breath. Didn't Bruce Wayne realize all that penguin business was part of the past? I am the light of this city, he said, and I am its mean, twisted soul. Does it really matter who's the mayor? Wayne regarded him coolly. It does to me, he said. Yawn, Max replied. He moved away. For a moment, Bruce thought it had been a mistake to come. Then he saw Selina. She wasn't dressed in a costume either, unless her costume was Selina Kyle. Bruce quickly crossed the dance floor. She was talking to Chip Shreck, who was dressed like some soldier from ancient Rome. Selina, Chip was saying, in what almost sounded like awe. Ms. Kyle, may I have this? Bruce stepped in, and Selina looked at him as if Chip Shreck didn't exist. The band started to play something slow. Somehow they were in each other's arms and dancing. Sorry about yesterday, he said quickly. Some big deal came together. Fell through, and Selina cut in before he could get into further trouble. It's okay, she said and shrugged. I had to go home, feed my cat. Bruce looked into her eyes. No hard feelings? She pressed closer to him, looked up and smiled. Actually, semi-hard, I'd say. Bruce took a step away, suddenly embarrassed. If only he didn't find Selina Kyle so attractive. But he did. There's a big, comfy California king over in bedding, she suggested. What say we... You mean, Bruce asked with a certain irony, take off our costumes? Selina's answering laugh sounded more sad than happy. I guess I'm sick of wearing masks. Why did you come tonight? He asked her. She shook her head. You first. He drew her close again. To see you? When she finally replied, he heard that same sadness in her voice. That's lovely, and I really wish I could say the same, but I came from Max. Bruce almost stopped dancing. You mean you and Max? He asked tentatively. Selina laughed and shook her head. This and Max, she explained, reached into her purse and pulled out a Derringer. Bruce pushed the little gun back in her bag and continued to dance. Selina was surprised she had even shown it to him. But there was something about Mr. Bruce Wayne, something mysterious, but something that made her want to trust him at the same time. She decided to talk before he did. Don't give me a killing Max won't solve anything speech, she began, because it will. Bruce shook his head ruefully. Hey, look, I'm sure you have plenty of reasons to hate your boss, but Jesus, Selina, you're not the judge or the jury. I mean, just who do you think you are? She looked at him thoughtfully and a little sadly. I don't know anymore, Bruce, she said, and she could hear her own despair. Still they danced, swirling around the floor. She looked up and saw Mistletoe, leaned forward and gave him a gentle kiss. A sad kiss. A kiss under the mistletoe, she said, repeating another's words. Mistletoe can be deadly if you eat it. Bruce looked at her. But a kiss can be even deadlier if you mean it. He stumbled over the last word. They both said it at the same time. You're her? You're him? They were. They both knew it in the instant they spoke. But who would believe it? Bruce gently slid back her sleeve. His hand on her skin was almost a caress. The burn I gave you, he said softly. She could hear the regret in his voice. She needed proof as well, undid the bottom button of his shirt, and felt along his stomach muscles until she found the row of scabs. Oh, God, she whispered, afraid to say what came next. Does this mean we have to start fighting now? Bruce's only answer was to pull her closer. She hugged him tight. She was scared. What do we do? She asked after a moment. I don't know, he replied. Until we figure it out, let's keep dancing. For the moment, Selina realized that was fine with her. And then the floor exploded. The Penguin cackled as dust and dancers settled around him. Bits of floor sailed back to earth. People screamed. Pieces of ceiling rained down around everyone. People fainted. Parts of other things fell down, too. People ran. The Penguin made a small bow from within his duck boat. You didn't invite me, so I crashed. The penguins he'd brought along squawked approval. He looked out at the assembled partygoers, waiting to be sure he had their total attention. Right now, my troops are fanning out across town for your children. He paused to allow the audience to gasp.
Yes, for your firstborn sons. The ones you left defenseless at home, so you could dress up like jerks, get juiced, and dance badly.
He turned to a certain older firstborn kid.
I've personally come for Gotham's favorite son, Mr. Chip Shreck.
More people gasped. A couple even screamed. Ah, violence, threats, murder. The Penguin was getting back into murder in a big way. Hey, this was even better than being mayor. The two of them had gone down together when the floor exploded. Bruce had been underneath to cushion the worst of her fall. By the time they had both regained their feet, the Penguin had managed to take Chip Shreck captive. Selina turned away from the Penguin. "Bruce," she said, "we have to do something." But Bruce was gone. Max stared in horror as his son was taken hostage.
"You're coming with me, you great white dope,"
the Penguin declared with perverse glee.
"To die way down in the sewer."
Max almost stopped breathing. "Not Chip," he gasped. "Please," he cried. "Penguin, if you have one iota of human feeling, you'll take me instead." The Penguin turned.
"I don't," he barked, "so no."
But Max had to save his son. "I'm the one you want," he pleaded. "Penguin, please. Isn't it Max Shreck who manipulated and betrayed you, not Chip?" The Penguin paused.
You have a point. I'll let Newt Rockney live for now."
He lowered the gun he held to Chip's face. Cautiously, the younger Shreck backed away. Max's relief was replaced by dismay at having the gun put to his own head. He looked at the Penguins around him. They were not only wearing funny-looking helmets, they were armed. They looked ready to shoot into the crowd. And then the whole world went gray as 4 smoke bombs went off simultaneously. All Max could do was cough. The Penguin's wonderful plan took shape. He could see it now, a pretty scene in a precious bathroom, the child's own. The walls are covered with sheep, daisies, and letters of the alphabet. So cute it could make you sick. A toddler, a firstborn toddler, stands making faces at himself in the mirror. He's giggling, and then sees that he's not alone. His visitor, the knife lady, grabs him before he can scream, her hand clamped firmly over his mouth. And away they go. Too traumatic for you? Then let's postulate another drama. A darling little boy sits at the windowsill, staring out with wonder at the night sky. And who should appear at his window but a happy clown? The boy clasps his hands in delight. The clown smiles even more broadly. "Hey, little guy," he says, "come on." He reaches out a hand, and the little boy takes it, ecstatic that he is going on an adventure. And look over there in that plush nursery. The infant boy sleeps soundly in his expensive crib, custom-built, no doubt, with the lumber from some endangered tree. One of our acrobats vaults through the window and scoops up the child in one fluid motion. And so it goes, house after house after house. Firstborn son after firstborn son, all of Gotham City's firstborn brats, soon to be sunken and strangled. It was enough to make the Penguin breathless. Max had never known this kind of misery before. The Penguin had him in a cage above a pond full of brown and acrid goo. Max half expected to choke to death on the fumes. And it was cold down here. That huge air conditioner was turned so high that there was ice everywhere. Sparks flying from the generator next to it did nothing to warm the place. Max was quite sure the Penguin was going to kill him. "Oh!" the Birdman almost sang, prancing about, a long black umbrella in either hand. "This is gonna be good." He turned to Max. "To cut down a whole crop of Gotham's most promising before their prime." He pointed his umbrella toward a spot past Max, a whole lake full of some liquid even more vile than that beneath the businessman. "How do I lure them in, you ask?" the Penguin continued. He popped open his umbrella. Max flinched. But instead of bullets or knives, this bumbershoot transformed itself into a charming miniature merry-go-round. The music was hauntingly familiar. "A little Pied Penguin action," the Penguin explained. "And you get to watch 'em all sink in a deep puddle of your industrial byproducts. And then you join 'em." Max was too cold to care. It was a circus train from hell. The odd collection of circus wagons wound its way through the early morning streets of Gotham City. Bright wagons, painted blue and red and yellow, cheerful circus colors. But each was a cage, and behind the bars were children, 4 or 5 to a wagon. Occasionally a baby's cry would break through the near silence. Most of the boys seemed too terrified to speak. The locomotive stopped, waiting for the next delivery. At the wheel, the organ grinder impatiently plucked his monkey from his shoulder. "Would you hurry up loading those kids already?" he yelled back at the collection of acrobats, jugglers, and clowns aiding him in his work. A shadow fell across his face, startling him. His monkey screamed. The organ grinder looked up. Batman yanked him from his seat. The Penguin had to get this just right. No use frightening the little darlings before they all drowned horribly in the toxic ooze.
"This way, kiddies,"
he said in his most inviting tones.
"Jump right in."
He heard a shriek from the entryway to his lair and saw the organ grinder's monkey scamper down the stairs toward him. Why was the chimp here without the organ grinder?
"So where are the kids?"
he demanded. "Boss," the fat clown pointed to the monkey. "He's got a note." The Penguin snatched it from the filthy little creature and uncrumpled the page.
"Dear Penguin,"
he read.
"the children regret they are unable to attend. Have a disappointing day. Batman."
It took the Penguin a moment to come to grips with this. It would take him more than a moment to control his anger. He glared down at the monkey, which was looking up at him.
"It doesn't make sense to shoot the messenger,"
the Penguin reminded himself, and grabbed his second umbrella. He whirled and pumped 20 bullets into the fat clown. That felt better. But the Penguin wasn't finished yet. He had more plans, bigger plans, deadlier plans. And this time, he'd use somebody he could trust. Why hadn't he just done this in the first place? After all, he'd been planning this campaign for years, designing the special headgear, fitting the guns and heavy weaponry so they could be operated by birds. He looked out at his troops, over 100 strong. It had taken close to a whole day to outfit them all, but it had been worth it, for they finished their work just before Christmas Eve.
"My penguins,"
he began solemnly,
"we stand at a great threshold. It's okay to be scared. Many of you won't be coming back."
He had to stop and wipe away a tear. Yes, this was the day of glory. Or, as he liked to think of it, Operation Penguin Storm. Sure, his troops would be little more than zombies to the Penguin's radio signals, but his cause was just, not to mention incredibly bloody. He realized he had to finish his stirring address.
"Thanks to Batman," he continued, "the time has come to punish all God's children. First, second, third, and fourth born."
He laughed grandly.
"Why be biased? Male or female, the sexes are equal with their erogenous zones blown sky high."
He looked over to the control center where the poodle lady sat at the controls, beneath banks of monitors that showed every corner of the sleeping city.
"Forward march,"
Penguin declared.
"The liberation of Gotham has begun."
The whole Penguin army swiveled in unison as the poodle lady twisted the appropriate knobs at the controls. She flipped a switch, and the Penguin started to march in step toward the large sewer pipe and the city beyond. The Penguin had to wipe away another tear.
"The Grinch just stole Christmas," he announced. "I'm gonna kill it, barbecue it, chop it up, and chew its bones."
Batman drove the Bat ski boat, a combination of speedboat and jet ski, down Gotham River and into the main conduit of the sewers. The Batmobile might be down, but there was always more than one way to patrol Gotham City, especially when your prey was a creature like the Penguin. The sewers were dark and vast. Changes over the years had made it virtually impossible to map them from city records, but now Batman knew where to look. Alfred had picked up a signal similar to the one the Penguin had used on the Batmobile. The Penguin's fate would be anything but remote. Batman looked down at a small screen before him. The glowing dot was getting closer. He picked up the phone that connected him with the Batcave. "I'm homing in on the signal's origin," he announced. "Ready when you are," Alfred replied. The glowing dot reached the center of the screen. The Penguin's control center was just ahead. "Got the coordinates," Batman added. "They're..." He rounded a corner in the sewer pipe. There in the flow of his headlight were 24 penguins. Penguins! And strangely outfitted, all wearing odd helmets and carrying what looked like miniature bazookas. This was what the Penguin controlled. The birds raised their weapons at the approaching boat. Batman gunned the jet motor as he turned the Bat ski boat to follow the curve of the sewer pipe. The Bat ski boat rocketed forward, rising from the water and climbing the curve until Batman hung upside down for an instant from the top of the pipe. The Penguin's missiles exploded harmlessly below as Batman brought his craft back into the water on the far side of his adversaries. "As I was saying," he continued, he quickly gave the butler the proper coordinates along with a few final instructions. Now they could put the Penguin away for good. All my children, the Penguin thought, marching bravely down the streets of Gotham City, about to blow the place to holy hell. He stared at the monitors and saw his units take up their positions outside Gotham Plaza. The poodle lady looked up at the big clock. 10, she began to count down. 9, the Penguin could barely contain his enthusiasm. "The Christmas Eve of destruction," he chortled. 8, she continued. 7, the Penguin couldn't help it. He felt like singing. "Silent night, violent night," he began. "All is shrill," the poodle lady chimed in. "All is blight." The Penguins were in position and were given instructions to angle their bazookas for maximum destruction of the stores and the last-minute shoppers. The Penguin was about to give Gotham City the biggest Christmas light of all. Alfred sat at the console as Batman repeated the coordinates. 28 degrees west, he said, "shall we?" Alfred typed the appropriate command into the computer. "Frequency jammed," the monitor replied. The Penguin couldn't take his eyes off the video screens. This was the kind of program that really sucked you in. The poodle lady threw a switch, then a second and a third. She seemed to be having a little trouble. Funny thing," she began. "Your Penguins, they're not responding to your launch command. In fact," she flinched, "they're kind of turned around now, like someone jammed our signal." The Penguin stared at her. "Jammed?" "Don't say it," he said. She could only nod rapidly, her eyes on his deadly umbrella. The Penguin moved to the consoles and began punching buttons. "Not in that pipe. No. There!" He punched another quick succession of controls. Some kind of a boat. A Bat ski boat. "I'm starting," he said very softly, "to lose my temper." The Penguin grabbed a fresh umbrella and ran for his duck boat, a few feet away from Max's cage. He jumped into it and steered the contraption out of the sewer and up the stairs. Max couldn't believe it. He had thought it was hopeless, only a matter of time before he was killed along with any number of others. Instead, he'd seen not one but 2 of the Penguin's master plans brilliantly foiled. And the Penguin, so sure of himself before, seemed to have forgotten everything except revenge. And that everything included Max. Maybe with the Penguin gone, there was some way Max could get out of here as well. The key and freedom were within easy reach. Max bent down and grabbed the key from the monkey, which stood jabbering down at the dead clown. He stepped from the cage, and as he did, a whip suddenly wrapped around his leg. Catwoman. He plunged into the water, colliding with the fat clown's body. But the clown had a gun in his belt. He grabbed the gun as Catwoman dragged him from the water with her whip. Batman had almost reached the Penguin's lair. Up ahead, something was moving. There was a thermal image on his screen. Not a boat exactly, more like a large duck heading for the surface. Batman turned sharply, entering the sewer main that angled up toward the surface. Where penguins go, bats can follow. The Penguin reached the top of Arctic World, grand and glorious exhibition site of yesteryear, and more important, with a door that led outside, where he could get lost in the great mass of Gotham Park and Gotham City. He laughed as he steered the duck vehicle onto the snow beyond the exhibit, and then heard the sound of breaking glass. The laughter died in his throat. Something was plowing through the top of the old Arctic World, something like a damned bat ski boat. It flew through the air straight for him. It was going to land on top of him. Batman's aim was perfect, crashing into the Penguin's escape vehicle. But where was the Penguin? Batman popped open the cockpit and climbed out, looking around for some sign of the Birdman. He saw movement from the corner of his eye, and then the Penguin was on top of him, wrapping his legs around Batman's neck, pecking at his cowl, stabbing with the tip of his umbrella. Batman staggered under the weight. "I think you're jealous," the Penguin declared between pecks, "that I'm a genuine freak, and you have to wear a mask." Batman shifted, trying to throw off his assailant. "Maybe you're right," he replied. The Penguin obligingly jumped away. "In the end," he said as he raised his sleek black weapon, "all that counts is who's holding the umbrella." He pressed the handle, and a long blade sprang out from the other end, transforming the umbrella into a sword. It was time for Batman to pull out his own weapon, a black palm-sized electronic device. The Penguin's eyes narrowed. What was Batman up to? And then he looked beyond his foe.
My babies,
he whispered. Batman risked a look and saw a whole army of penguins waddling toward the Arctic world. Out of the penguins' control, they had returned to the place they knew. The penguin yelled and lunged forward with his sword. Batman easily avoided it, but in his surprise let go of his own weapon. The penguin cackled and snatched it up. With a grin, he aimed it at Batman and pressed the button on it. 2 panels in Batman's boat fell away, releasing a crowd of bats. Confused bats, agitated bats, locked in an enclosed space for far too long. They flew right for the penguin and the high-pitched homing device he still held.
"Ah, you brought your in-laws,"
he said, swatting at them with his umbrella. But there were too many of them. He staggered back onto the pathway leading to the Arctic world, running now, trying to escape the circling rodents. He crashed through the glass with a scream, falling back into his lair. The glass cut him in a dozen places, adding to his exhaustion. And the bats, they were everywhere, swooping, chattering. He looked down and saw the moat around the old Arctic world island, coming up fast. He was going to hit hard. He splashed into the moat and let himself sink, all the way to the bottom. Batman looked down at the Arctic world exhibit below. The penguin was nowhere to be seen. But there were 2 others down there struggling, Max Shreck and Catwoman. He'd have to take care of that. Moments later, the penguins' helmets began to click and hum. They turned and lifted their bazookas aloft, aiming now for the rotting remains of the rest of the old exhibition. They fired in unison. The exposition exploded, full of sound and light, for one final time. She finally had Max Shreck where she wanted him, alone in this crumbling exhibit. There was no way for him to escape. "I don't know what you want," he pleaded, doing his best to smile, and waited for her to suggest something. "Money?" he suggested. She didn't react. "Jewels?" Nothing. "A very big ball of string?" he asked in desperation. "Your blood, Max." He grew even more pale than he had been before. "My blood?" he sputtered. I gave it the office." "I want gallons," Catwoman purred. She curled her whip around his neck with a flick of her wrist. It was time for Max Shreck to have a little date with that big humming generator. But Max didn't want to go. "Let's make a deal," he continued feverishly as she dragged him along. "Other than my blood, what can I offer?" She thought of that trip out the window during the snowstorm. "Sorry, Max. A die for a die." They were very close to the wheezing generator. The melting ice seemed to have affected it. It was definitely laboring, shooting out a whole steady stream of sparks. All she needed was to ground dear Max properly, and he should go up in sparks as well. A rope appeared nearby, dropping from the dome above. A moment later, Batman dropped in as well. Max whimpered and crawled towards him. "You're not saving one life," he called out. "You're saving a city and its way of life." Batman drop-kicked him into the generator. Max yelped as he bounced off. Just a small shock this time. Sometimes, Catwoman had to admit, she liked Batman's style. But then he said, "First, Max, you're going to shut up. Then you're going to turn yourself in." "What?" This was what she got for getting involved with this sort of goody-goody. "Don't be naive," she cried. "The law doesn't apply to people like him." She paused to look Batman in the eyes. "Or us." "Wrong on both counts," Batman said, shaking his head, and reached out for Max. Catwoman cartwheeled straight at Batman, delivering a swift kick to his abdomen. He flew backwards, falling. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, picking himself up. "We could drop him off at the city jail, then go home together." "I'm not a house cat, Bruce," she began in a pleading voice. This only made Batman start to smile. Catwoman lashed out with her claws, scratching his face. He pivoted away from her talons, punching out with his fist to push her beyond arm's reach. "Don't you see, Selina?" he pleaded. "We're the same. Split down the middle." He reached out a gloved hand to her. "Just like in a fairy tale," she agreed. "I could live with you in your castle forever and ever." She leaned forward. She longed for the sweetness of his kiss. Instead, she gave him a headbutt. Batman reeled backwards. "Selina?" Max said as the light suddenly dawned on him. "Selina Kyle? You fired." He looked over at the recovering Batman. "And Bruce Wayne, why are you dressed up as Batman?" "He is Batman, you moron," Catwoman replied. But Max had a gun in his hand. "Was," he corrected. He shot at the rising Batman, catching him in the side of the neck. Batman fell to his knees as Max turned the gun on Catwoman. She should have been watching Max, not arguing with Bruce. "Corn dog—" She stopped herself. That was Selina Kyle's thinking. That was her past. Catwoman would have to face the gun. You killed me, she said demurely. Batman killed me. The Penguin killed me. 3 lives down. Got enough bullets to finish me off? One way to find out, Max replied and squeezed the trigger. 1 bullet hit her arm, another ripped into her thigh. She kept on walking, pulling off her hood. 4, 5, she said, still alive. She was bleeding, but she couldn't feel it. She pulled out her stun gun. Batman pulled off his own mask, trying to staunch the flow of blood from the wound on his neck. No matter how bad it was, he had to stop Max before he killed Selina. He tried to get to his feet. Selina, he managed. Please stop. Max fired again, hitting her other leg. She kept on coming. He shot 1 more time, blowing away the barrel of her weapon. Sparks flew from what was left in her hand. She kept on walking, a little shakier now. 6, 7, she managed. All good girls go to... Max aimed at her chest and pulled the trigger. All he got was a dry click. He was out of bullets. Selina said casually. 2 lives left. How about a kiss, Santa Claus? The once powerful Max Shreck stepped back, knocking against the generator. Selina placed the stun gun in her mouth like some sort of electronic pacifier, then grabbed Max, hugging him close. What are you? He screamed. She leaned her head forward as if to kiss him, as she drove her talons into the generator's open fuse box. Both their bodies began to jump violently as electricity arced through them. Bruce managed to stand as they disappeared in a shower of sparks. Commissioner Gordon looked out over Gotham Plaza. It was a happy scene for Christmas Eve, as all the stolen children were matched up with their anxious parents. It had been a strange night. At one point, reports had come through about a group of penguins wandering around sporting strange helmets and carrying weapons. The patrol cars hadn't been able to find a thing. Suddenly, the lights dimmed all around. Then, for some reason, the bat signal blinked to life in the sky. A moment later, it was gone, and the lights came back. And this time, so did the Christmas tree lights. Parents and children cheered. Gordon frowned. Batman heard a high scream of joy coming from beneath the sparks. It sounded like a cat. He stumbled forward and saw a body on the floor. Selina, Kyle, he called. There was no answer. There was only one body, and it belonged to Max Shreck. He was quite dead. The generator had stopped, but somehow the lights were still working. But the air conditioning was gone, and it was getting hotter by the minute.
Gotta crank the AC, he heard behind him. Stuffy in here.
Batman turned. It was the Penguin, risen from the sewers. He looked terrible. His soiled clothing was soaked and torn, his face and hands bleeding. He supported himself on 2 umbrellas like crutches. He struggled over to the air conditioner, not even aware someone else was present. The generator explosion had ignited some of the upper parts of the display. Fiery rubble fell from above. The Penguin fiddled with the dials on the singed air conditioner. It wouldn't respond. He turned and saw Batman.
Without the mask, he croaked. You dropped dead handsome.
He raised an umbrella.
It's the drop dead.
He pressed a button on the handle. The top of the umbrella transformed itself into a whirling merry-go-round.
Shit, the Penguin muttered. Pick the cute one. Heat's getting to me.
He searched the floor for the other umbrella. It wasn't there. He looked up. Batman held it in one gloved hand. The Penguin took a step away.
Hey, you wouldn't blow away an endangered bird.
Batman raised the umbrella and aimed straight between the Penguin's eyes. The Birdman tugged at his collar. His face was turning a very unpleasant shade of red. He turned and waddled off. His breathing labored.
You wouldn't shoot me in the back, he called. Would you?
He stumbled, but started doggedly forward, making for the last few vestiges of ice at the edge of the moat.
I'm overheated is all. I'll murder you momentarily. But first a cool drink.
He took a final step, then belly flopped, inches away from the last glistening chunks of ice.
Of ice water.
He managed to gasp. His flipper reached for the ice just out of reach. The flipper fell. Batman put down the killer umbrella as 4 penguins, larger than their fellows, emperor penguins, appeared from the shadows and came forward to surround the fallen Birdman. They reached down with their beaks and grabbed the Penguin, raising him like pallbearers at his funeral. They turned and bore him away, back into darkness. Batman could never tell anyone about this. They would never believe him. He wasn't even sure if he believed it himself. All the lights were on in Gotham City. The Christmas tree blinked merrily, and the bat signal blinked back. Carolers sang, children laughed. It was almost Christmas. Commissioner Gordon sighed and looked to the mayor and his staff. He pointed at the flashing bat emblem in the sky.
Think you'll ever forgive us?
The mayor shrugged. Probably not, but he'll always help us. Alfred had come for him. Battered and wounded, Bruce Wayne sat in the back of the rolls. He stared out the window as the car passed the happy families that surrounded the tree in Gotham Plaza. He really couldn't feel anything. He said after a while, I didn't find her. Maybe. Yes, Alfred replied. Maybe. He frowned as the revelers blocked the way ahead and turned down an alley looking for a shortcut around the crowds. What was that? He thought he had just heard a loud meow. He turned and looked out of the back window, just in time to see a shadow dart from the street into a side alley. As Alfred stopped the rolls, Bruce jumped from the still-moving car and disappeared after the shadow. Moments later, he reappeared with a jet-black cat in his arms. He returned to Alfred in the rolls, shivering as he closed the car door behind him. Well, Alfred said, come what may, Merry Christmas, Master Bruce. Right, Bruce replied, trying somehow to return the butler's good wishes. Sure. And peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Then he looked at the cat he held. And women, he added. Alfred drove on in silence. It is late on Christmas Eve, or maybe very early Christmas morning. High above the buildings projected against the clouds, the signal flashes, a bright yellow oval filled with the shape of a bat. It fills all the night sky, and then it is gone. Welcome to Gotham City. This is Michael Murphy. We hope you have enjoyed this production of Batman Returns. Novelization by Craig Shaw Gardner. Story by Daniel Waters and Sam Hamm. Screenplay by Daniel Waters. This program was produced by David Rapkin and directed by Lars Hoel. Abridgment of the novelization by George Malko. Batman Returns is a production of Bantam Audio Publishing. Production copyright 1992, DC Comics, Inc. All rights reserved.